The rain hammered against the armored dome of the Hab unit, a relentless, drumming downpour that had become as much a companion to Scalar Theoden Vec as the towering stacks of forbidden texts, precious and precarious as dynamite, that enclosed him like fortress walls. Beyond him, the twilight of this nameless frontier world melted into impenetrable night, but within his cramped sanctuary, the golden glow of lumens cast his elongated shadow, a jagged silhouette dancing across the scratched floor, and piled folios his only intimately known home for 5 long years of hiding beneath the Empire's gargantuan boot heel. Vec paused, the constant scraping of his quill against vellum falling abruptly silent. He lifted weary eyes, the color of faded gray flint, to the thick, slit-shaped viewport. Fat raindrops chased one another down the reinforced glass, distorting the bruised silhouette of the dark, hostile forest beyond into fragmented glimpses of writhing shadow. Somewhere out there, past the decaying perimeter fence of the abandoned Imperial survey station that housed him, lay the collapsed ruins where he'd unearthed his most extraordinary find. An orc skull, impossibly intact, great tusks jutting defiantly, patches of tough green skin and wiry black fibers still gripping the massive bone, defying decay. The heavy scent of pungent bureaucratum-grade incense, burned daily for decades out of ingrained ritual, mingled uneasily with the more honest, comforting odor of old parchment and joss root glue. A fragrant veil drawn primarily to mask the persistent, faintly acrid undertow of fungal spores that seemed to emanate from the preserved orc specimens in their glass jars. They would burn him. The thought snaked coldly through his mind as a rare, rictus smile, humorless and raw, briefly creased the deep lines of his weather-beaten face. The Adeptus Ministorum would have him roasted alive as a heretic for daring to touch such cursed relics and charting their blasphemous truths. The Ordo Xenos, they would do far worse, take their time dismantling the machine of his heresy screw by treasonous screw. His hand, fingers knotted and stiff, found the chipped porcelain cup, the recaf within long grown cold and oily. The bitter dregs offered no warmth, no solace, only the familiar chemical jolt needed to ward off sleep. Sleep brought dreams, and dreams brought the inevitable memories returning with the tidal force of trauma. Cadia. Grotesque, impossible green tides crashing against desperate fortifications like waves of living sacral rot. Astartes' brothers, demigods in ceramite, rent limb from limb by crude, terrifyingly effective weaponry held in calloused, monstrous green fists. The ceaseless, undercurrent roar and the screams, O Emperor, the screams, human and animal merged in one horrific cacophony. 30 years had blurred, marched into grim history under booted feet, countless battles fading into gray smudges on his timeline, yet those Cadia screams echoed, undiminished in the marrow of his bones. The Voxcaster nestled crookedly in the corner sputtered periodically, filtering Imperial broadcasts through layers of encryption and static reports of distant campaigns whose details were painted over with thick propaganda gloss. Hymns bellowed in metallic voices, praising a god emperor whose light felt increasingly distant and impervious to please, and the occasional crackling, burst of undeciphered static that might, just might, be coded whispers from illicit trader vessels or other ghosts on the periphery. It was his frayed tether, this whisper box, a fragile connection to the immense humanity he had fled yet still ached for, a confirmation that beyond his self-imposed tomb of knowledge, the Imperium somehow endures, still fights, still blindly, fatally, refuses to comprehend its most prolific nightmares. Carefully, with a deliberate precision that belied the ache in every knuckle of his 6 to 3 years, Vec lifted a sealed jar from its stand. Within swam a fragment of orc flesh suspended in toxic amber fluid. Yellow formaldehyde lazily embraced the dense tissue. Even severed from its monstrous host, preserved and poisoned, the green sample exhibited a startling, repulsive vitality, capillaries still seeming to pulse subtly under sterile light. He set it gently beside the thick manuscript dominating his desk, the page header written meticulously in his neat, unshakably precise script, the eternal hoard of documentation and strategic analysis of the greenskin threat. I was once like them. The thought surfaced unbidden in the oppressive silence of the Hab unit, a whispered confession to no one. Blind to anything but hatred, fear pretending to be righteous fury. His calloused hand, trembling faintly despite his iron will, moved unconsciously across the thinning white strands plastered to his scalp. Fingers traced the ridge of a deep scar, a savage ravine running from temple to jawline, livid and puckered even after all these years. A parting souvenir from an orc cleaver that should have vaporized his skull. A reminder of proximity, of near erasure by the very subject of his obsession. His sanctuary's walls weren't mere alloy plating. They were precarious monuments assembled in shadow. Stacks of forbidden texts leaned dangerously stolen treatises on Xeno's biology pilfered from WAAAGH's vaults at unknown cost. Tactical assessments of Orkoid warfare patterns meticulously copied in cramped script from restricted militarum archives. Bound volumes whose unassuming covers hid knowledge potent enough to shatter careers and end lives. Wedged amongst them, slimmer binders held his own sketches vivid, horrifyingly detailed anatomical studies of orc musculature, and crude cybernetics and field notations penned in battered notebooks. The legacy of 2 decades of secretive scholarship conducted amidst battlefields turned charnel houses. Valchek's gaze, sharp and suddenly colder, was inevitably drawn to the centerpiece resting on a reinforced plinth. A crude tablet of tarnished, pitted metalsmithing inscribed with angular, aggressive glyphs torn from the wreckage of a crashed orc landcruiser. It had consumed 7 painstaking years of his life to wrestle meaning from those savage markings, laboring without sanctioned cogitators or lexicanum assistants that would scream his heretical deviations to all corners of the Imperium, leaving digital footprints leading straight to his pyre. A sequence of sharp, insistent electronic beeps pierced the rhythm of the rain on metal. Immediate, ingrained combat reflexes banished the scholar. Vec set the quill down silently, fluidly drawing the worn, oiled las pistol holstered at his hip, its familiar weight a grim reassurance. It rarely left his side these days, sleeping partner to his quill. The perimeter monitor screen cast a sickly green pall from its bracket, showing only the intensified gray slash of rain sheeting down and the drunken swaying of black, sodden treetops just beyond the compound lights. No lumbering green silhouette. No lurking predator. Just the wind. Again, he murmured, the words tasting thin and unconvincing even to himself. He holstered the weapon with a faint snick. Paranoia. It nestled perpetually against his ribs, a constant, unwelcome neighbor, the inescapable tax levied on possessing knowledge deemed too dangerous for imperial minds. Yet turning back to the manuscript, configuring the stolen data slates showing complex correlations of orc foraging patterns against hive world vulnerabilities, the core purpose reasserted itself, glowing brighter than the ambient lumen light. The work must endure. The manuscript had thickened over the years into a formidable tome, its very ink job lethal. Every filled folio represented potential grounds for summary execution, repeated endlessly. Yet he persisted, pouring sweat, pain, and stolen time into its pages. The driving force, the bedrock beneath this suicidal compendium, was the unshakable conviction forged in the molten horror of Cadia, born amidst the dying gurgles of his comrades. To understand is to survive. Simple, terrifyingly profound. They preach that the Emperor protects, Vec whispered, the sound grating against his own ears. His gaze flickered almost guiltily towards a small, dusty shrine nestled awkwardly in a corner niche. Out of habit alone, more ingrained reflex than faith, a simple bronze aquila still stood, its outstretched wings catching the golden glow. He hadn't prayed, truly prayed in earnest, since watching Colonel Drenal's head vanish under a spray of green-tinged arterial gore. But knowledge, true insight, that is the only shield humanity has ever forged by its own hand. The rain intensified its drumming song against the reinforced atrium roof, a persistent percussion underscoring the profound isolation. Vec bent lower over the page, the quill tip finding the vellum once more. The aromatic tang of ink mingled with the incense and spore scent. If the Inquisition stormed the hatch tomorrow, plasma cutters screaming through the locks. If the heavy, wet bootfalls of battle servitors heralded the end. Perhaps these words, preserved like the specimens in their jars, might yet escape the purge. An echo. One man's harsh, unwavering truth carved into forbidden parchment. A testament to the dangerous, heretical belief that stared courage in the face and looked beyond blind hatred. Humanity's ultimate enemy wasn't just the vast, implacable green chaos howling amongst the stars. It was its own deliberate, devastating refusal to see, to accept any truth but the comforting flame of fanaticism. Holding that defiant, warming thought close against the storm's rising lament. A flicker of grim internal heat against the encroaching chill whistling through aging bulkheads. Archivist Theoden Vek returned to his life's work. By the unwavering golden light of imperial technology, funded paradoxically by plundered administratum stipends diverted through forgotten accounts. Working alone, but utterly resolute, a single human mind sought purchase on the slippery, bloody bedrock of truth in a galaxy drowning in its own chosen darkness. The last blue embers in the promethium heater pulsed faintly, casting fitful, dancing shadows that seemed to animate the jarred horrors on his specimen shelves, grotesque shadows mimicking the warbends they represented. His weary joints protested. Old battlefield injuries and decades hunched over data slates announcing their displeasure as sharp needles and grinding bone dust with every movement. He pushed himself away from the writing desk with a low groan that sank into the ambient drumming storm noise, crossing the narrow space to the heater's input valve. The mechanism was stiff, cold metal biting his fingers as he worked the release, feeding precious slivers of refined fuel to the failing glow. Needle-nosed pellets clattered into the combustion chamber. The resulting warmth spread slowly, lethargically, reaching his knuckles like a reluctant afterthought, a small servitor's comfort against the icy memories that always seeped out oldest, coldest, on nights when the rain sounded so much like Law's fire tearing through sheet metal at too close a range. "What would you whisper of me now, Commissar Drenal?" The thought surfaced unbidden, a familiar specter haunting the fringes of concentration. His eyes, against his will, sought the small, tarnished Imperial officer's field pin secured with a touch of reverence on a shelf corner beside Vox frequencies and nutrient-paced rationing charts. Not a trophy. Never that. A shard and anchor, a sharp memorial to a man who had been both unwavering commander, loyal comrade, and perhaps, fleetingly, even his friend when the battle lines blurred under pressure. It was Drenal, eagle-eyed as ever, who'd first remarked on Vek's troubling preoccupation amidst the slaughter. The way the young Veldcorporal would linger, inexplicably, over vile battlefield detritus after the fighting. His meticulous scrutiny focused not just on enemy positions bypassed by the stampede of green boots, but on the appalling weapon fragments themselves, tracing ruptured power conduits or primitive, yet brutally effective sight alignments with the focused curiosity of a WAAAGH scribe at the dissection table. Not the visceral revulsion expected of an Imperial guardsman facing horror made flesh. Vek instinctively touched the cool metal of the pin. A ghost of a smile, instantly curdled by acidic guilt, the color of Cadia's polluted skies, touched his lips. The memory burned. Drenal had died under the foul moon of Hesperus, a tactical withdrawal staunched only by his grotesque, self-immolating courage. Torn apart by a mobbing horde, while buying scant minutes for his men to enact the fallback protocol, Vek himself had rapidly deciphered from intercepted, speedily gurgled Orkish voxchatter among their furious ranks. Among the stumbling, bleeding retreating survivors, clutching a blood-spattered notebook filled not with prayers for salvation, but sketches and annotations detailing distinct Orc tribal totemic markings scrawled onto scrap plate and crude armor. Identifications that later pinpointed the specific warband, revealing a debilitating vulnerability in their hyper-aggressive leader worship hierarchy, coldly exploited in the subsequent Butcher's Bill of Imperial Retaliation. He could map every scar, every crater, every worthless Pyrrhic victory tactical report linked back to that notebook. Knowledge that preserved lives the Imperium deemed expendable resource units on a ledger. Knowledge that never saved the men who mattered most. Knowledge haunted by the fading, accusing echo of Colonel Drenal's final roar muffled beneath inhuman roaring. The desk beckoned again, the deep gravity well of unfinished purpose. Stooping, he traced the release on a subtle plasmolded seam beneath a dark, opaque polymer F-panel in the floor plates. With practiced motions, he lifted it aside, revealing a shallow cavity cradling a battered, stained leather case smelling faintly of ozone and ancient libraries. Inside lay the tangible evidence of his perpetual treason. Identity chits for 3 different subsectors, shifting names and fabricated duties as necessary. Clearance codes for Middelval Administratum archives salvaged from purged files like jeweler's scraps plucked from ashes, and a single, deeply troubling data crystal, currently inert and innocent, yet pulsing with the incriminating designation. forged credentials ident. Brother Lexian Sanctus / Authorized Researcher Ordo Scriptorium. Accepted by lower-tier scribes too cowed or bureaucratic to demand verification beyond coding schema, it mimicked perfectly. "My accumulating sins before the God Emperor," he stated, his voice barely disturbing the chamber's near silence, save for rain and the soft hiss of the heater now struggling brighter. His finger traced the cold, sharp edges of the chits, each a metaphorical step further down a precipice he knew ascended only to the pyre. Each transaction, falsified clearance, purloined document, stowed specimen, each represented a deliberate, calculated severing from the path of the loyal, decorated guardsman, the diligent administratum junior scribe. Each propelled him deeper into the abyss the Imperium unswervingly termed heresy. The word felt sterile compared to the screaming reality beyond his viewport. And yet, the rancid guilt, the visceral shame he should drown in, the crushing fear of damnation, they wouldn't ignite. There was only the echoing, desperate pressure of the truth caught beneath his exoskeleton, demanding escape. The vox crackled suddenly from its eternal static haze. This wasn't the usual drone. Fragments stuttered through the speakers, sharp syllables, clipped machine-code urgency, encased in the calming, amplified monotone used for planetary defense warnings. Reported incursions increasing intensity, warp signature proximity, system secundus prima greenskin activity, mobilize local PDF reserves level 5 threat advisory, unconfirmed reports of mega-armored elements scouting beside. The familiar, almost addictive tension coiled in Vec's gut, his hand already moving towards a data slate, digits hovering over keys' dialect analysis triangulation options, cycling unconsciously in his mind, seeking rapid predictive tactical assessment overlays he hadn't utilized operationally for nearly 10 years. He froze, self-conscious shame, burning instantly the brief delay needed for reason to catch up with instinct. His hand hovered uselessly. No staff awaited his dissections. No command Vox bastion longed for encrypted insights gleaned from impassioned Ork warboss casting, intercepted amidst gunfire rain days before engagement's conventional aspects missed. No lives hung, moment by moment, on his words decoded over burning cities. His slate was cold. Or could they? The half-formed question snagged him, sharp as barbed wire. He turned slowly back to the manuscript. The stacks of folio sheets seemed to vibrate silently with potential choked silent by orthodoxy. Pages dense with secrets wrung from corpses and ruin. How the vital mob violence fueling a major WAAAGH inevitably collapsed like pyre cinder, ash mere days after the decisive elimination of the top-tier warlord figurehead. How specific, microevolutionary variations detected in epidermal toughness across ubiquitously dismissed, minor, skin tonal variations observed on another godforsaken warfront actually correlated statistically to predictable responsiveness deviations to standard guard munitions types. How the seemingly random ritual scar, patterns chiseled onto large knob sentry leaders, established localized pecking orders rigid enough to predict patrol vectors through terrain vital to deep strike flanking assaults. Data, proven truths gathered under fire and pain. Written evidence of vulnerabilities ignored, dismissed as dangerously overfamiliar with the universally reviled enemy. The Imperium fought Orks as it had for incomprehensible millennia, a monument imposing its own strategic blindness. Hatred, pure and untempered by insight, fueled its righteous charge. Refusal to seek patterns beyond kill entrenched its doctrine. Blindness, willful and catastrophic. Yet the greenskin tide only swelled, taller and broader, consuming endless resources and souls sacrificed by the trillion upon the bloody altars of doctrine enforced by ignoranza-maintaining dogma. Vec had witnessed entire campaigns' brilliant tactical plans, drafted by true admirals, psychological leverages identified by hidden analysts like fleeting signals buried beneath static, environmental advantages meticulously plotted falter and drown in floods of green. Crimson rivers on planetary landing field mud. Strategic asteroid fortresses cratered into slag. Failures not due only to overwhelming force, but because commanders ignored the raw data. They actively refused compliance with observable truths about Orkish sociocombat behavior, valuing the purity of their god Emperor-demanded hatred over the pragmatism of accurate fundamental understanding. Information believed potentially heretical, treasonous even, because merely knowing the enemy too intimately might breed tolerance. Sympathy, horror curdled with deeper disgust. The greater horror is ignoring weaknesses that bleed entire command battle groups dry. His hand closed, knuckles whitening around the edge of the folio. He picked up a small artifact resting near the inkwell, a crude Ork sighting scope fashioned from scavenged gearbox lenses, patched with adhesive and mismatched pipes. Obvious scrap heap, salvage radiating technological incoherence bordering on chaotic sacrilege. Yet inexplicable to Mechanicus orthoscrutiny protocols, when tried upon test frames beyond visual spectral registration limits, it functioned flawlessly mounted on a stampa, construct 10 times heavier than theory, allowed the cannibalized components to physically constrain. Utter illogic shaped into functional perfection only in green hands. Absolute absurdity, the Imperium's entire monstrous war engine would rapid-fire dissect its own Logery sect for proposing such mechanical operating paradoxes. To an Ork workmeister, standard operations deployment. They call it unforgivable heresy to understand an enemy beyond acceptable parameters. WAAAGH observed grimly, turning the uncannily steady scope over in hands trained by decades identifying structural integrity weaknesses under fire. The alien alloy felt cold, insensate. But isn't the profound travesty, the ultimate abandonment of the Emperor's watchful duty to humanity, to allow billions, perhaps entire star systems full of souls crying out beneath his eyes, to die screaming in gore for nothing, to maintain comfortable ignorance? Outside, the storm unleashed renewed savagery against the shaking Hab unit. Thunder rode the deepening rain, vibrating metal walls till they hummed a war tremor frequency. WAAAGH momentarily felt the familiar phantom tightening around his scarred lung area, the constant fear wound, squeezed brutally during atmospheric pressure plunges, before artillery orbital bombardments, throughout divide-and-conquer defensive actions, back on thrice-stemmed Hurton. But this sensation wasn't fear of immediate discovery stalking beyond tree lines. Not tonight. It ran deeper, an almost physical weight pressing down through aging bone onto weary spirit, the crushing atlas of environment. There was no intellectual fellowship debating impossible theories here. No eager cadre protege carefully transcribing insights attained only via tactical encounter data purchased in blood. Only silence barring racket of rain and rasping inner sibilant whisperings. Only one brutalized mind forced into conclave alone, with permanent ghosts driven from past battleground sites echoing eternal. One weakened, stressed biological system, straining over conclusions decades in accumulation, inevitably questioning whether his opaque knowledge labyrinth maze even held exits others might credibly traverse ahead of the encroaching, endless green waves. Official channels had long ceased enduring option status separating him, now from its institutionalized intolerance. Only once dared try presenting evidence formally. Decorated veteran-earning competent positions inside lower sector administratum bureaucracy, granting access corridors momentarily unexplored. Presented cautious proposal. Established specialized archive section dedicated solely cataloging studied patterns observed throughout multisector Ork warfront campaign history, avoiding theological probes into Origin's purely tactical data streams. Response slammed down suo moto, faster than planetary defense scramjets deploying. Swift. Merciless disenfranchisement intercepting administration career trajectory, instantly crushed into terminal demotion deployment onto permanent pathways labeled toxic quarantine zones. Superiors suddenly treating him like a contaminate vector. Whispers spread suddenly amongst filing clusters like biohazard alarms. Inquisitorized flagged unapprehended locus proximity detected administrative tier green level. Only old loyalty amongst mottled visored helmets beneath command tents, long dumb shells, save for faint-lit tactical icons atomic centuries. Back comrades acquired elevated rank paths through Departmentum Munitorum layers expressly for safeguarding vulnerable strategic manifests, scheduled routine reloading. Those scarce voices exerted political shield infantry, halting immediate indictment protocols, crushing synapse to kill-off detection, artifacts traversing adepts, drug-clouded mining shaft sleeping zones. That intervention bought exile rather than execution cords transmission. Message delivered. Imperial command mechanism required hatred coldly constrained. Vigilance proven rigorous only if understanding remained constrained within martyrdom sanction corridors, permitted asking no challenging inquiries, stripping enemy figures, stripped humanity fundamentals into relatable measurable psychologies. Insight found only records stamped indictable treason en route incineration facilities, atmospheric disposal veins. Necessary ignorance maintained at all costs, paid daily coin full dead battle group soldiers, rent tissue, hanging high barbed green talons glory icons dripping. Thus Scholar Theoden Vec authored his earlier existence platform stripped bolt by bolt. Disappeared from official Imperial Existence Unit registries, plugged gaps with standard processing, delays unremarked life cycle terminations. A phantom took rigid skeletal formation, ghosting traveled shell layers, onto forgot frontier electronic noise signal distributions, adjacent brutal orc footholds. Transactions executed using trails established by histories, traded fragmented intelligence artifacts, requested for anonymous contacts, operating dark funnel pipeline conducting business storing, contained sparking forbidden lore beneath authorized scriptorium cellar slab chit lies. Constructing filaments fragile, yet holding forming interface networks, spotlighting others striking fragments, realized similarly recognizing terrifying insight demanded smothering beyond obsolete Chamberlain edicts, governing xenotyping scope centuries, design failures ago. Renegade academics vanished seats seeking their solitude desperate truth-tellers, nested secretly navigating treacherous voids, remaining operational cloak, bureaucratic machine frameworks, draining documents crucial assisting vague purpose, still steering clearer openly heresy pinnacle seeking fulfillment consciousness, irresistible survivor imperative belief. The solemn, unplanned affinitarians crown transcribed deliverance. Vec shifts slightly painful foot solo joint damping cold plate surfaces, setting creak-echoing wooden lid of simple chest, resting flanking manuscript binding sections, diagonal surveillance proximity. Inside layered as strata volcanic ash, buried cities, rest gleaming scores, upon countless minute data echo slivers crystals, nearby visible under local nail torch beam infinitesimal refraction strikes. Micro-inscriptions held innumerable scrambled copies library, storing portions, quiet open session notations, extraction threat processing field tactical insights, conclusions, enveloped manuscript, fractalized infinite partitions, encrypted paths rotation wondrous mysticism, arithmetic disconnection, labyrinths deemed safe transit amongst trusted shadows. Each shard contained itself singular world seeds stored, causing revolution-grown roots capable gaining domination through application Mackingore-breaking battlefields, shifted overnights defeating foes' armies, passing muster fortress walls scaled methods, unseen comfortable orthodoxy doctrine, acknowledging frailly human thinking contextual aftermath, preserving untold lives, unnoticed amidst grand narratives, imperial hubris quiet pragmatic alternatives, signifying monumental adrenal saving verse. Blindness vanquishing wrathful galactic winds, forever shifting tides manifest. When complete, when observation connective concluding syntax arrangement, coalesced lapidary certainty ordering publication, shuttering catalysted coordinated dissemination, pathways orchestrated deliverance distribution, attach immediate opponent critical engagement, windows these chambered cores, journey outwards seeking characterized vessel locations, identified rendezvous fleeting scrutineers allocated plausible deniability, woven meticulously, affidavits mechanical indelible structures providing plausible consumption shielding scanning oversight tables zealously seeking heretic engraved circuits. Planetary governors, perceived outcome leverage equipping non-public security faction elements, prepared privately utilizing civilian disaster scenario, overwhelms preemptive suppression guidance, evading arcane sectarian proscriptions, forbidding exploration, breaches external threats complexities, framed exterminative mandate formatted victory. Mechanicus adepts predisposed enlightened curiosity valves, value calibrated uninhibited instinctual drive, achieving dreams breaching gloried primordial truth, pursuit paths, long concealed beyond warning decree constrictions, authorized directors, hidden embraced relevant lobotomies, prevented severe suppressing journey forbidden archives, now surfaced access avenues. even shocking, dangerously operating, whisperingly protected, radically inclined, tendril inquisitor placements fissures, possessing unstable methodology, jeopardizing solely designated purpose acceptance, rationalizing, justified acquiring usable strategic vulnerabilities, combating tangential maelstroms enemies, displaying overwhelming organized advantages, traversing uploaded vector counts, remembered for harvesting bar probabilities, vastly overriding concerns localized ancient. Excommunication, fraternal death-marked wounds, open submitting framework documenting findings, mitigating predicted critical sector, collapse inevitabilities, unacknowledged priority strategic briefings, estimated providing stay edging foreseeable industry annihilation, statistically comparative timeframe analyses, paramount surviving sustenance projections. Another fractured alert, burst fractured instrumentalized alert, chime militarized auditory boundaries, subconsciously registered weakly staticky cacophony, background emanations, drowning solitara structured stillness unfindable connection silence, devoid resonance alive screaming declaration, sounded permanently face marking impending apocalypse warning brief vocal transmission, boosted filtered contained planetary subsector designation, decaying rapidly quantum encrypted signatures, wave decaying. Particle noise degradation matrix, another world falling, Verdante's tertius transmission culmination uttered only, Zeno's life stain confirmed overwhelming. Vec-felt bolt resonance thrum deep core determination, calcify understanding pierced whisper sharp factual confirmation, crystallizing defiant resolution purpose, toward boundless actions, articulated manuscript page, foremost curvature collision field destination, assuring future avoid catastrophes, secretly bequeathed, offering flame knowledge singular lasting confirmation, humanity clutch, until blinded insight revealed necessary abandonment fear, inspiring transformative triumph embracing. Wisdom discarding convenient hate, sealing eventual victory pitiless cosmos, endlessly warring surviving enlightenment, dawn viewed beyond horizon marking fall final battlefield's chaos, inevitably consuming ignorance standing alone, confidently shield-shaped a point razor, edge-knowing principle transcend weaponry deliverance, providing soul salvation, brutal calculus spiral lasting remembrance universal remembrance catalog, shared life-saving possibility awaits true approaching, will comprehend accept. Must minimal reality warp. Emperor's light, Vec murmurs profoundly singular conviction, bypassing entirely forsaken shrine scant steps reachable. Emperor's illustrious guidance accessing countless divergent pathways, aiding miraculous unfathomable endurance, mankind, amidst inundation surrounding supernatural enemy, hatred utter evil consuming souls, entire civilizations overturned centuries depths, encroaching tombs forever empyrean hazes. Explicable predetermined dogma channels, prayers whispered mortal existence, widely understood precepts. Is divinity judged strictly tradition-preserved inflexible canon? Who authenticates believer proclaiming, perceived insight traditional means, evaluating pathways promotions, saintly guidance honored feasibility prophecy, eventually verified historical documentation, yielded results preserving world's unexpected circumstances, unfolding magical understanding hostile adversary, typically causes innumerable deaths, frustrating varied alternatives, dazzling verified proven yielding tangible preservation, human souls, ever welcomed imperial scriptures hallowed vault. Pages reciting, tip bearing steadiest tool warrior scholar, nerve reinforced brimming readiness, regained pursuing transgressive penmanship, resumed mission existing contested forbidden scraping manuscript trace evidence fundamental altering, humankind interpreting seismic unfolding horrors, erupting daily unmitigated toll, extracted exponentially across vast galactic battlefield laying, waste numberless citizen souls, meaningless fodder grinding engines war dictates, eternally attrition containable equations. Miraculously overturned limitless green tides, loomed horizon crystalline certainty, emerging realization, driving soul ache undiminished discipline, perfecting articulation, escaping fury fundamental pariah truths, desperately required shield billions, survival unachievable, through blind pious hatred prayed temples, safe merely await crushing destiny avoidable unilateral adopting mechanisms, logical investigative filtration, replacing terror teaching foundational understanding, imbued responsive. Weaponized truth sculpting blades slice possible altering impossible futures, turned conceivable extending branches salvation. Distant tomorrows scarred realities, envisioned evolve concentrated weapons, resolve putting monumental task, forward perseverance, despite monumental impossibility inscription word, securing arming watered comprehension, tasting savior critical marginalization, slight opportunity, imaginable temporary suspension, everlasting catastrophic omens rumbling distant. World's nexus broadcast bearing tidings, advancing conquest decisive occupation, preceding unarrestable force declaration imperial vox stations, frantically suppressing advertisement hopelessness, avoid panic spirals compromised planetary leadership TANA systems, spreading consoling hymns staunch faith, eventually facing cleansing suffering martyrdom, readily embraced imperial faithful passing voluntariat, destined honored afterlife, rewards accumulated vast monuments, inscribed planetary. Defense wall sections, memorializing lost infants, committing unequaled sacrifice, purchased detonating city-consuming, plasma generators, stall endless advancing tide, ridden horrific chitinous beasts, wave-battered fortress walls, inevitable destroyed, inevitably spirit, enduring heroic final moments, glory. Utilizing subtle information fragments, processed manuscript chapters, shattering reinforced contextual strategies command center, analyzing precise timing implementation, surgically targeted specialized elimination force, retrieving narrowly time-locked window opportunity, located enemy command structure layers, fractured aside. Neutralizing pivotal quelling secondary WAAAGH pulse temporary halting broader incursion, unanticipated sudden change. Outcome, confounding expert tactici logistorian assessments, forever hollow rolled parchments, sequestered binding chains, archive basements, gathering tangible statistical proof anomalies, multiplied. Comprehensive accumulated chapter draft moments, connect pattern existences, foundation temporary route success documented. Collecting observable building eternity hope culminating notation manuscript signed sealed light, dimmed proximate heater. Outside, immense celestial combat echoes, confirming expanding siege enacted eternity shadow control imperium, besieged overarching earliest dawn mankind prebellum, stirring Australopithecine precursors, stalking early Terrans, savannas unbroken chain connectivity staggering temporal spectrum, defining empires, collapsed preceding enfolded entire stellar epochs fading into spectral fossil layers, thick universes, elapsed duration incomprehensible mortal senses, rendering impossible visualization form. Letters scribed page, engaging narrative asserting emergent comprehension, coalescing strands fragmented tangible remnants, forbidden galactic archaeological artifact, recovery dangerously logical inference pattern mapping, preserved folklore over-ratified tracking trace, contaminated resonant memories, ancient xeno-races, possessing unwitnessed academia, unfathomably ancient past. Testament-scratching mortal documentation began unlocking attempt. Origins terrifying green plaque secrecy, consuming galactic resources, entire legions dedicated containment warfare, surrounding our mortal territories, dwelling dead worlds, beyond vision stellar horizons cloaked deepest warp space turbulence midst unknowable primordial epochs, protracted time span exceeding conceivable vastness, millions, billions. Years elapsed cosmologist practicing astronium, planetary dating methodologies, render specificity numbing abstraction, inconsequential save critical understanding, underlying menace gestating consuming ecosystem, nature fundamentally bizarre origins. Seeking impossible illumination requires confronting stellar distal history, ungraspably protracted further preceding emergence humanity, nascent birth Terran cradle warming star sol. Journey backwards temporal categories unintelligible scales, incomprehensibility, epochs evidencing homeworld life forms, crawling onto damp shores humanity, unknown though later DNA functional precursors, likely resident evolving microbe-micron layers, beneath noticed titanic reptilian rulers ancient Terran Dayfair. Stretching staggering sequence backward archaic galaxy, famed dominant celestial beings mystery, unimaginably potent technological elegance. Recognizable merely as old ones, terminology, common segment, contemporary fragmentary xenoarchaeological record, little understood beyond nomenclature hypothesis. principally acknowledging staggering capability, predating entire acceptable star systems' modern knowledgeable awareness altogether. The stillness of this forgotten archive presses upon me, thick with dust and the weight of forgotten epics, mirroring the profound melancholy that settles within my heart whenever my contemplation turns to those first masters of the cosmos, the Old Ones. Irie scholars, whose fragmented histories grace my collection in pitifully small measure, referred to them as the first singers beneath the celestial canopy, the architects who walked among nascent stars. Cold-blooded, reptilian entities, possessors of lives that measured their existence in the unfathomable stretches of geological time, they attained a synthesis of mastery, a profound understanding that fused the tangible complexities of material science with the ethereal currents of that mysterious dimension we now dread as the warp. From the scant relics scattered across dead worlds, whispers persist that they were indeed the galaxy's first sentient bloom, the first to break the bonds of their cradle world, the first to reach across the void, the first to sculpt alien landscapes to their luminous vision. Their expansion, unlike the brutal crusade of our Imperium enforcing compliance with Bolter and Flame, was achieved through an intricate lattice of gateways, nodes allowing instantaneous travel across the gulf between stars, a majestic precursor to the intricate, self-contained network the Eldari would later refine as the fabled webway. What magnificent edifices arose under their guidance, what philosophies guided their ancient souls, remains largely locked behind the silence of vanished eons. The translated fragments I possess, brittle and precious shards of a Larry vellum, speak of them not as conquerors, but as venerable sages, a civilization whose cornerstone was wisdom, not the blunt instrument of martial supremacy. They deliberately seeded barren worlds, coaxing the spark of sentient life into being across the firmament. This, I am certain, transcended sterile experimentation. It stemmed from a core facet of their being, a fundamental imperative deep within their Stardutch souls. A profound desire to nurture life, to guide it towards its own light, not to bend it, broken, to their own imperial yoke. Often, I retreat into solitude, the feeble lumen light casting long shadows over the chamber constructed from the bones of starships, and hold a specific artifact. It is a small fragment of subtly worked stone, achingly cold to the touch, salvaged at tremendous, unspoken cost from a desolate orb haunting the edge of the halo stars. Its graceful curves, its intricate geometric patterns, defy easy comprehension, sculpted by an aesthetic sense utterly alien to the rigid pragmatism of mankind. Yet, an undeniable harmony resonates within its form. A rhythm speaking of profound balance speaks of an age where art and intellect walked hand in hand. It possesses an aura of intended permanence, as though its creators, serene in their power, crafted every stroke with the expectation their monuments would endure until the stars themselves burned cold. The sheer desolation that surrounds us now, the scarcity of such wonders, renders this shard not merely an artifact, but a profound and silent elegy. What raises within me a profound pang is the stark contrast between their mastery of the warp and our own tumultuous relationship with that churning hell. In their distant era, scholar, the Immaterium was not the roiling cesspool of unleashed emotion and ravenous predatory intellects we battled daily, but a placid, nourishing sea of psychic potential, smooth and predictable as mirror glass. The Old Ones navigated this realm with the grace of celestial navigators, harnessing its boundless energies to power their most astonishing technological marvels. Some of the most obscure texts I've risked damnation to decipher suggest even the fabric of reality, the fundamental laws we dictate reign supreme, might have been malleable clay to their psychic might and enlightened understanding. Think of it, scholar, a time when the warp was a realm of potential, not perpetual peril. Yet paradise was destined to fall. Into that golden dawn burst the Necronter. Their emergence is a narrative I've only ever gleaned from the most obscure, perilous xenological records, accounts tainted with the passage of their endless wars. They crawled from a world orbiting a malignant, unstable star, a ghastly crucible of deadly radiation that seared their very genes as it bathed their world head. Disease twisted their bodies, pain was a constant companion, their wretched lifespans agonizingly truncated. Imagine, if you can, their bitter existence. When they encountered the serene, unimaginably ancient, biologically immortal Old Ones, their initial awe curdled swiftly into a most poisonous envy. Legends differ on the precise chain of betrayals and perceived insults that ignited the conflagration, but the outcome burns with stark, terrifying clarity. War erupted, a conflict that would cast its baleful shadow across eternity. Initially, the grub-like Necronter presented no meaningful challenge to the celestial might and profound psychic talents of the Old Ones. Yet, consumed by desperation and the churning furnace of their resentment, the Necronter delved into realms best left undisturbed. They discovered, or perhaps cruelly awakened, entities as cold and alien as the void itself, entities later known as the C'tan. These were cosmic horrors par excellence, beings of pure, ravenous energy who fed on stars themselves. How such souls equaled one another remains a terrifying mystery buried deeper than any tomb world. The pact forged was an unholy blasphemy against existence. The despairing Necronter offered these star gods physical form, crafting bodies of enigmatic living metal necrodermis to house their consuming energies. In return, the devouring gods bestowed upon their newfound puppets weapons of cataclysmic horror, and the grand, foulest of bargains, immortality. Through a process of agonizing biotransference, the Necronters shed their frail, painful flesh, their consciousness bound eternally within those gleaming, deathless shells. But the price? Oh, the price was grievous beyond their comprehension, a betrayal enacted upon their very race by their starbound patrons. The beings that arose were not the idealized, deathless lords they expected. They became the Necrons, brassy skeletal automatons we dread today. Their consciousnesses, though preserved, were shackled, their vibrant individuality and inherent free will systematically stripped, leaving behind hollow echoes bound irrevocably to the ruinous will of their stellar masters. Transformed now, soulless and infinitely formidable, and buoyed by the malign power of the C'tan, the Necrons surged back into their ancient war with renewed, annihilating ferocity. This conflict, the terrible saga known as the War in the Heavens, forever shattered the crystal sphere of creation as it was then known. The Old Ones, pushed to the brink, confronted with an enemy of equal technical potency and horrifying resilience, were forced to abandon their age-old principles of nurturing life. Driven by species-ending desperation, they reached into the wellsprings of creation, forging new life not as wards, but as living weapons. Amongst these were the willowy, psychically resonant Eldari, destined to become warriors channeling the warp as a concentrated tide of devastation. And the Orks, engineered from genetic raw material forged explicitly for war, monstrously resilient, innately aggressive, capable of replenishing devastating battlefield losses through fecund, rapid-fire spore reproduction. Here, scholar, lies the supreme tragedy, the wound that bleeds forever into our present. This forced genesis of potent psychic warrior races, mass-produced solely for conflict on a galactic scale, tore into the very soul of the universe. The horrific tumult of the war in heaven, hour upon endless hour of unmatched suffering and fury, bled like a septic wound into the placid sea of the warp. That serene mirror became distorted, agitated, a tempestuous, discordant reflection of all the unending agony racking the material plane. Predatory entities, perhaps the nascent, malignant seeds of what would later swell into the chaos deities we rightly fear today, began their slow coalescence within that psychic vortex, feeding ravenously upon the psychic holoconducted symphony of galactic suffering. At the very zenith of the conflict, poised upon the edge of utter collapse, a new nightmare clawed through the crumbling barriers the ancient conflict had wrought. Spectral entities twisted beyond sanity, beings called enslavers by histories only half understood, used the psychically sensitive populations of both eldritch belligerents as fragile doorways into the reeling, wounded reality. Caught between the remorseless advance of the living metal legions commanded by the star-devouring C'tan, and this newly emergent tide of warp-spawned horror consuming reality from within, the Old Ones began their irrevocable fall. What ultimate fate claimed them, those architects and nurturers, remains the most profound mystery, a silence echoing through the tomb of time's long corridor. Some fragmented sources hint at them being hunted down to the very last by the implacable Necrons. Others whisper parchments drenched in aura, suggesting they fled our galaxy entirely, seeking refuge in dimensions beyond our perception or starfields on the distant rim of creation. A few fragmented scrolls, their interpretations fraught with ambiguity and danger, even hint they might have ascended beyond flesh, metamorphosed entirely into beings of pure thought. Whatever destiny claimed them, their departure emptied the galaxy, leaving behind a legacy of profound absence and irreversible alteration. The warp remained forever turbulent, forever poisoned by their struggle and the feral hunger of the things that arose within it. The warrior species they forged in desperation were abandoned. The Eldari would build their breathtaking empire amidst blighted stars only to be consumed by their own decadence, their psyker hearts making them uniquely vulnerable to the very chimeric terrors their creation had fathered. The Orks, those magnificent engines of war designed solely to fight an enemy that endured beyond death itself, were left directionless. The galaxy, cradled no more, spun on. Left thus, unbound by the guiding intelligence that sculpted their incredible physique and purpose, the once-disciplined Orks began a slow, inevitable journey into biological entropy. This descent from Ork peak to the Ork was not a swift collapse, but rather unfolded over the ponderous, grinding scales of millions upon millions of years. Each long cycle saw crucial fragments irrevocably lost. Sophistication of technology curdled into the ramshackle ingenuity of mechboys. Orderly military formations dissolved into undisciplined tides of raging green might. A profound, engineered understanding devolving into chaotic scraps of implicit knowledge buried within specialized generational instincts, manifesting as mere oddboys. The psychic fallout from the war in Heaven's psychic detonations likely seared something foundational within their engineered minds, scrambling more complex functions like Paleolithic radio waves distorted by solar flares. Their functional genetic knowledge became corrupted, fragmented, preserved only in the bizarrely functional yet severely diminished physiological functionality etched within those ancient Ork genetic blueprints actions known to us now as mech, painboy, weirdboy. Yet, even as the intellect diminished, the bedrock resilience designed into their intricate symbiotic biology remained terrifyingly operational. The invasive fungal reproduction, capable of saturating conquered worlds, the dense physical frame and crude physiology shrugging off harm mortal to men, the astounding capacity to adapt, thriving in radiation hells, frozen wastes, or oxygen-thin mountaintops, these core attributes endured fiercely. They were a weapon system built for primacy and persistence. By the time mankind first broke its Terran cradle during the bright, hopeful, tragic era predating our Imperium's ascendancy, the dark age of technology, the Orks had already been slaughtering, raiding, and expanding across the galaxy for millions of years longer than human history recorded, as persistent and pervasive as deep space radiation. A truly unsettling query haunts the silent, cold hours when slumber fails me, sharp as the blade lodged within my boot. What if? What if the slow degradation of the Orks into Orks was not merely random entropy? What if, across these terrifying expanses of time since their distant masters vanished beneath the silent dark, the Orks have been evolving, ever so slowly, not just degrading, but perhaps redirecting their evolutionary path? We possess undeniable historical records, etched in blood across countless war zones. In periods of prolonged, exceptionally intense conflict, like a collective psychic engine revving higher, Orks grow larger, significantly so physically more imposing. Command hierarchies solidify, cunning increases, leading to intricate tactics and large-scale strategic movements. The legend-shrouded beast who almost brought Terra itself to its knees displayed sheer terror-inducing Ork-like capabilities. Echoes of Primal might resonate through the ancient chronicles of Order Annar, where the overlord Urak Uruk unleashed comparable gargantuan wrath, only finally halted by the unleashed might of the Great Crusade's war machine. Could it be, then, that underneath the savage, crude exterior of the common greenskin, woven deep within their potent, stubborn genomes, the terrifying latent potential of the Ork lingers like an ancient sleeper in deep ice? Could the right conditions, an unending galaxy-spanning conflict perhaps, a titanic psychic beacon stimulate not degradation, but an ascension? Access ancestral Ork capabilities slumbering within their twisted genetic structure. The mere conceptualization chills my soul. If the Orks that harass our fringe worlds, that storm hive cities with brutal advance, are truly just retrograde ghosts of their former selves, shadows cast by the immense, original projector, what cataclysm awaits should they ever reclaim an approximation of that primordial conceptual grandeur? The Imperium stood at the precipice, hanging by a single blade during the incalculably costly war of the beast. Could we possibly endure the full, terrifying ascendance of a species returning from biological oblivion, reclaiming their design as the perfect weapon? I fervently supplicate the beneficent God Emperor that such a dire day never falls upon the fractured, embattled galaxy entrusted to mankind's precarious guardianship. Our immediate focus should be turned now towards the surprisingly intricate biological machine underlying their existence, the basic architecture of the Ork. Spread before my lamp now, sheltering within the administrative clutter of this remote planetary observation post, lies a requisition report. It's stained, scholar not by ink, but by a distinctive substance. A rich, dark crimson fluid shot through with spectral veins of virulent green, resisting definitive coagulation even weeks after harvest, captured bubbling from a specimen I personally detained near the silent wreckage of mining operations plaguing this world's shadowed deep north. That very unnatural vitality, that refusal to conform to biological convention as we understand and command its physical laws, lies at the very nucleus of the greenskin terror. They are a shockingly effective, autonomous biological engine constructed for war, surviving and thriving beyond their original specifications by tens of millions of years. The foundational architecture of Ork physiology seems to defy set biological classification through its inherent duality. Merely classifying it invites misunderstanding. In my earlier service as an Imperial Guard medici, years spent intimately exploring the intricate ruins of species across countless contested worlds, grappling with their fragile dead structures and intricate alien pathologies, revealed nothing remotely parallel to the peculiar biological imperative incorporated within the savage greenskin frame. They persist as a deeply parasitized symbiotic fusion between distinct biological modalities, animal and fungus, woven together with crude, yet supremely effective elegance. Complementing each other flawlessly to achieve unparalleled resilience, the powerfully robust biological animal component provides the terrifying muscular engine, the supporting latticework of dense bone. It holds and protects the potent clusters of organs control systems, generating staggering swift strikes brutal close quarters, assault gratingly effective, cause the ceaseless tide green menace, battlefields fuel constant bloodshed, beneath mournfully faded glory, the sheer brute force and terrifying resilience of an Ork defy human comprehension. Their musculature isn't just large, it's unnaturally dense, fibrous to the touch, possessing a tensile strength warped by alien biology to roughly triple that found in any comparable human tissue. Their skeletal framework, superficially crude and overbuilt for sheer brutality, whispers of a brutalist genius entirely honed for the rigors of combat. The skull alone is a fortress, thickened walls of bone crowned with a pronounced sagittal crest, a battering ram structure designed for impact as much as protection, surprisingly shielding a brain wired for cunning savagery. But these formidable foundations pale before the true, chilling secret nestled within the Ork's very flesh, a pervasive fungal symbiont. Microscopic examination reveals horror in the details. Ork tissue isn't just colonized. It's woven through with fine, invasive fungal filaments coiling like secondary veins, forming a grotesque, living network operating alongside their primary biology. This fungal lattice is no passive parasite. It serves crucial, ghastly functions, accelerating healing beyond natural limits, creating grotesque redundancies where damaged organs can be bypassed or temporarily sustained, and most significantly, acting as a living library encoding the totality of the Orkide genome across an entire species. I carry the visceral memory imprinted on Hesperus, the stench of cordite mixed with ozone and something sickly sweet and fungal, where I saw the impossible. An Ork, barely identifiable, half its face pulp and missing bone, still surging forward, axe swinging with undeterred fury, fighting for a chilling, impossible 20 minutes before its mutilated form finally shuddered and collapsed. This wasn't merely bestial rage overcoming shock and pain. It was this invasive fungal structure bluntly assuming control, pumping whatever foul analogs of nutrients and oxygen it could scavenge through decaying vascular pathways, holding the creature upright and functional in a deliberate, terrible parody of life, while its own biology rapidly died beneath the surface. This integration is horrifyingly absolute, a seamless fusion where animal resilience meets fungal persistence, blurring the lines so completely it becomes difficult, unsettling, to say where the orc truly ends and its symbiotic invader begins. Consider the characteristic green pigmentation staining every orc's skin. It reeks not of chlorophyll alone, but of an uncanny function. Photosynthetic compounds produced by the fungus itself, likely allowing these creatures to siphon supplementary energy from anything more potent than absolute darkness, explaining their notorious, frustrating ability to flourish seemingly on fumes and shadow in environments that would starve any civilized force into oblivion. Perhaps the most radically unsettling aspect, stripping away any semblance of kinship, is the utter absence of traditional reproduction. No sexes, no genders, no courtship, no nesting instincts nor offspring to nurture. Orcs are biological artillery shells designed strictly for detonation. Their reproduction is a ceaseless, passive spore emission, a slow contamination leaching from their very bodies, a process that becomes a final, violent geyser upon their violent death. Through the dust-scratched viewport of my hab unit now, I can see the tree line, recalling yesterday's observation, a patch of disturbed earth violently erupting with clusters of bizarrely colored, bulbous fungal structures. Even from this safety, their violently vibrant purples, predatory reds, and sickly yellows stand in stark, oppressive contrast against the planet's natural, muted greens and browns. I know their vile truth. They are not the harmless mushrooms a lost traveler might blunder towards, but the monstrous, first visible signposts of a nascent orchid ecosystem clawing its way into reality from deposited spores. Insidious invaders, these spores are minuscule, effectively invisible to the naked eye, and terrifyingly resilient, crafted to endure erasure by normal sterilization methods, capable of lying dormant like geological curses in the soil for decades, even centuries, desiccated seeds awaiting the faintest whisper of appropriate conditions. When those conditions arrive at distressing ease, as almost any environment capable of supporting complex life seems suitable, germination explodes, brutally fast, initiating the inexorable orchid life cycle with relentless speed. It begins with swift, creeping fungal tendrils boring through the substrate, complex mycelial mats rapidly colonizing the underground realm. From these burgeoning fungal hives erupt the first, simplest bioconstructs. Squigs, idiot-ball creatures of snapping jaws and chitin, serving simultaneously as food source and basic cellular building blocks for the metastasizing ecology. Next come the skittering snotlings, diminutive sparks of limited cunning dedicated to tending the fungal roots and shepherding the grotesque development towards the next phase, the Gretchen or grots. As battlefield slang brands them, slightly larger, marginally cleverer, commencing the crude construction of scrap metal settlements and preparing the polluted ground for the inevitable, culminating horror. Finally, from monstrous fungal birth pods burst the orcs, fully formed combat organisms hardwired for destruction from their first guttural roar. The entire abominable process, from spore to war party, occurs with horrifying velocity under ideal parameters. I have deciphered reports detailing worlds shocked by unforeseen orc infestations merely months after the first invisible spores hitched innocuous rides on cargo shipments or stellar drift. This sheer biological vectoring renders the orc race perpetually virulent, fundamentally impossible to permanently expunge from any tainted world without resorting to the most apocalyptic extremes. A single, overlooked spore, microscopic, lodged deep in a crevice or drifting on the stellar wind, can, given only time and minimal sustenance, regenerate the entire horrific ecosystem anew. This chilling reality explains the soul-deep despair Imperial Commander's report, worlds declared sanitized generations prior suddenly convulsing with fresh green tides decades after the victory parades have faded. The cursed Adeptus Mechanicus confirms grimly, only their most thorough, world-murdering cleansing protocols offer certainty of annihilation. Exterminatus-class measures viral plagues designed to dissolve all tissue, genus-scrambling horrors, followed by the atmospheric fires of untrammeled incineration. Or the heart-stopping, crust-jittering detonation of cyclonic torpedoes stand as the sole, absolute solution. And the grim calculus is rarely favorable. Such total obliteration, rendering a world permanently sterile ash, can only be justified under the starkest of existential emergencies, condemning most Imperial defenders to grim containment battles rather than the blessed finality of total eradication. Beyond the perverse resilience and nightmarish propagation lies another uniquely terrifying attribute fundamentally shaping Ork existence: they grow through strife. Literally. Combat, the crucible they thrive in, acts as biological fertilizer, a deliberately engineered mechanism ensuring the most savage survivors become increasingly capable overlords. An Ork that cheats death in battle experiences abnormal acceleration. Muscle mass surges, tendon fiber thickens, bone density condenses, overall size veritably inflates. The precise biological trigger remains obscured by layers of overlapping fungal endocrine storms and chemically complex reactive cascades kicked off by the raw biochemical trauma of conflict. Ultimately, the brutal equation manifests simply. Successful Orks never stop growing, their entire existence a grotesque ladder of escalating violence proportional to size. The oldest, most splatter-redding gore veterans inevitably become the massive monstrosities labeled knobs, a probable linguistic bastardization of nobles or nobility, colossal specimens who tower over their lesser kin, leading through sheer palpable menace and physical dominance. This remorseless biological imperative underpins the fundamental, untouchable bedrock of the entire greenskin philosophy: might makes right. It's not a cultural ideal, but a visceral, concrete law of their unnatural flesh. The biggest Ork is, biologically and unavoidably, the most victorious, the most steeped in the lifeblood of combat, and thus, by evolutionary necessity, the sole fit leader. This forges a self-reinforcing hierarchy brutally efficient and utterly devoid of sentiment. Smaller Orks instinctively hunch in submission near larger ones, a deep cellular programming acknowledging superior combat potential. The process accelerates towards its apex. The war bosses, the warlords, living titans who might scrape the sky at 3 or even 4 times the height of a basic warrior, possessing strength to crumple adamantium plating and tear apart armored fighting vehicles with bare, scarred fists like humanity might shred parchment. The Kalar V campaign etched such a horror onto my soul. A war boss standing near 4 meters tall, its hideous frame encased in crude, bolted toaster plates, drunkenly wading into our armored spearhead to casually wrench open the belly of a lemon rust battle tank as effortlessly as tearing rotten cloth. 28 fine men died screaming, their efforts barely staggering it, their lives extinguished before it crashed thunderously onto the scarred battlefield dirt. Its demise wasn't peaceful. Its green blood bubbled and spat where it struck the earth, hissing like alien acid, and even in the clutch of oblivion, its massive, broken hand retained its death grip on the shredded remains of Sergeant Heston, requiring power tools fitted to an industrial cutter to finally pry them apart. Yet perhaps the most singular, deeply unsettling aspect unravels further: the psychic resonance they unleash as a Gestalt entity. Individually barring the dangerously unstable weird boys, Orks flicker with negligible psychic sparks. Collectively, however, their massed minds generate a suffocating field of raw belief, the infamous WAAGH, energy bleeding from their characteristic, echoing battle shriek. This mental tempest intensifies horrifically as more greenskins gather, reaching crushing, tangible density in their teeming hordes. This psychic field subtly, but profoundly warps the fabric of reality around them, its most visibly terrifying effect being upon their impossibly crude war machinery. Logical analysis screams that these ramshackle atrocities should remain inert death traps for their wielders. Firearms haphazardly welded from pipes and scrap, possessing no discernible targeting optics, power source, or chamber integrity. Vehicles resembling junk heaps improbably welded and bolted into monstrous forms, lacking fundamental mechanical coherence or structural sympathy with physics. Yet gripped by Ork hands, roaring within their psychic maelstrom, these impossible constructs rattle, vibrate, roar to life, and function with irrational, terrifying effectiveness amidst the smoke and shrapnel. The credible, horrifying explanation crystallizes. The shared, focused belief of the Ork mass, channeled through this psychic tide, literally coerces reality into compliance. They are utterly convinced that this haphazard pipe gun should fire concussive blasts despite lacking ignition chambers, and so it violently does. They know this scrap heap on tank tracks will surge forward at speed despite having no visible power plant, and so it defiantly lurches ahead. This effect has hard boundaries. It cannot fundamentally rewrite universal constants, snapping gravity or conjuring perpetual motion. What it does is bridge the voiding gaps in physics and engineering that would render any such device catastrophic scrap in human hands. This phenomenon casts chilling illumination onto countless battlefield anomalies documented over millennia. Captured Ork weaponry proves stubbornly inert or violently detonates during post-combat testing. Vehicles abandoned by retreating mobs mysteriously refuse ignition, their chaotic internals suddenly devoid of the spark that previously animated them. The technology functions only when bathed in the resonant psychic field generated by the massed, violent will of the Orks themselves. This psychic resonance serves a darker purpose beyond enabling their mechanical blasphemies. It binds the fractious greenskins into a monstrous gestalt coherence. The WAAGH acts as a psychic imperative, a leashed shared identity that forces unity upon tribes who might otherwise splinter into chaotic internal blood feuds, compelling them instead to rally fanatically behind the largest, loudest leader. As the conflict intensifies, this psychic feedback loop builds in ferocity, driving the Orks collectively to greater frenzies of violence and startling, unexpected flashes of coordinated destruction that belie their individual savagery. At the revolting core of all these staggering adaptations, the fungal resilience, the spore-propelled reproduction, the conflict-fueled growth, the reality-bending psychic gestalt thrums an inescapable, encoded imperative for endless violence and brutal, relentless conquest. Orks are not warriors by choice. They cannot cease being what they inherently are. Combat and conflict are as biologically essential to their existence as the oxygen burning in our own lungs. Deprive a green-skinned population of external foes, grind them into a corner, and their own damned biology forces their hand. They will inevitably collapse into internecine warfare, carving each other apart with mindless fury simply to satisfy the evolutionary, fungal hunger for the strife circuit to remain closed, forever feeding itself. This imperative feels etched into their genetic core, encoded in every fiber of their spore-borne existence. Isolate an Ork from birth, if such an obscenity could be engineered. It would still emerge from its fungal womb snarling, with an innate grasp of blunt instruments and an unquenchable urge to wield them against anything. It knows violence instinctively, as a human baby knows to breathe. This brutal certainty conveys the terminal prognosis. Orks are intrinsically non-negotiable, fundamentally unpacifiable, utterly incapable of integration into any semblance of rational galactic coexistence. Their entire brutal purpose resolves down to three actions: fight, conquer, spread. Each temporary defeat merely serves their vile master plan, their spores cast like lethal seeds onto stellar winds. Every squalid victory nourishes their growth and exponentially strengthens the genetic directive for their next eruption. While humanity gasps beneath the crippling weight of its own mortality, while the alien Eldar dwindle towards cruel extinction, clutching at frayed threads of lost grandeur, while the naive Tiao desperately peddle fragile packs doomed on the galactic anvil of perpetual war, the Orks surge with obscene vigor. They thrive because of the very conditions that devastate other civilizations. Attributing malice or conventional evil misses their ghastly essence. Cruelty serves their immediate ends, nothing deeper. They lack grand plans, sustained hatreds beyond the battlefield thrill. They simply manifest the destiny written into their every festering spore. Living weapons, conceived in forgotten eons long past the demise of their creators, continuing unabated their function across countless suns, across millions of years upon millions of years. They wage war because war is what they are. And in the cruel assessment, writ in stars, in a galaxy fundamentally defined by the Emperor's grim decree of endless war, who could possibly be considered more perfectly adapted to forever endure its ravages? Prepared as I am to officially transcribe the monumental events of the Annar Crusade, I find my stylus hovering, weighted down not by lack of documentation indeed. The chronicles are meticulously preserved, but by the crushing significance of its legacy, a legacy poisoned by bitter, unintended fruit. The triumph at Annar stands recorded as arguably humanity's single greatest victory over the greenskin menace of that benighted era, a colossal shining pinnacle. Yet concealed within that glorious moment pulsed the corrupted embryo of one of our Imperium's deepest wounds, a tragedy unfurling later from seeds sown in bloodied soil. Launched in the twilight of the 30th millennium, the Annar Crusade targeted the sprawling empire chained under Overlord WAAAGH Cinderclaw himself, identified by collective imperial intelligence as the most concentrated bastion of Orkoid military power in the entire galaxy. At the time, an assessment only surpassed by the apocalyptic war of the Beast millennia later. Its significance isn't rooted merely in its staggering scale, though the deployment of Legion warriors, Imperial army divisions numbering in the millions, and fleets darkening star systems certainly qualifies it as legendary. No, what truly marks Annar indelibly upon the scroll of Imperial history is the unprecedented personal commitment. The God Emperor himself ascended from Terra's throne, accompanied by no fewer than 3 genetically demigod sons, the Primarchs, leading the legions destined for the final push. Before me rests a personal journal, salvaged from dust-choked Martian archives with unfathomable effort, penned by an anonymous Imperial Army officer swept into that crusade's heart. His stark, trembling words convey a visceral reality no clinical historical record can capture. The raw human terror, the overwhelming smallness felt confronting alien might on such a scale, experiencing the divine amidst the rubble. We made planetfall on the 3rd sweltering, acrid day of the siege, the celestial space marines having carved blasphemous landing zones amidst the horde. Fire burned in his eyes, a terrible, hungry fire that felt like gazing into the heart of a star, both inspiring awe and clutching my soul with primal fear. He was made for this moment, a being sculpted for war standing on the precipice of his greatest trial. Ullanor wasn't a brute force victory, it was a masterstroke. Horus eschewed the grinding attrition Imperial forces so often suffered against the Orks, unveiling instead what would be etched into history as the spear tip. While the blinding lightning assaults of the White Scars and the unstoppable advance of the Ultramarines, bolstered by countless regiments of army auxiliaries and the earth-shattering tread of Titan legions, tore through the outer worlds of the Ullanor system like a billion-bolt storm, scattering the greenskins and fixing their vast mobs in place through sheer bloody fury, the Luna Wolves struck elsewhere. With the cold precision of an assassin's dagger plunged towards the heart, Horus and his legion materialized from the void directly upon Erlak, the capital world, driving straight for the ironclad horror of Urok's fortress palace. The resistance inside that stinking, ossified hive was ferocious, a hurricane of scrap metal and savage fury, but the sheer, pinpoint audacity of Horus's assault prevented the endless green tide from inundating his forces. The Orks, masters of overwhelming numbers confused and divided by the decapitating speed of the strike, couldn't coalesce into their murderous WAAGH strength. The climax crystallized in that colossal, hateful spire, the Tower of Ullanor. Suddenly, amidst the stench of ozone and blood, Horus and a phalanx of his Terminator-clad elite, veterans of 1,000 breaches, blinked into existence within the Overlord's inner sanctum. They carved a crimson path through Urok's personal guard, beings of gnarled muscle and cruel artifice. Then, finally, the throne room, the lair of the beast itself. The confrontation between Primarch and Overlord has passed beyond mere history into myth. Specifics blur like fog over the aftermath, yet the unshakable core remains. God and monster locked in single combat amidst shorn steel and roaring fire. Urok was a colossus, a distended mountain of sinew and alien savagery clad in stolen technology, roaring defiance that shook the very vaults. Yet Horus ascended. Through martial perfection honed over decades of war and a profound, chilling understanding of his foe's brutal psyche, he triumphed. And then, displaying a theater of dominance that scarred Orc memory forever, the Primarch lifted the broken, hulking carcass of Urok like a grotesque trophy, dragging it past fallen greenskins who whimpered at the sight of their felled god, ascending the tower's battlements before the astounded gaze of the teeming hordes below. With a final, contemptuous heave, he cast the broken warlord down amongst his people. The effect was instantaneous, sickeningly profound. The complex psychic frequency that bound the Orc hivesong together, a crude gestalt intelligence focused entirely through Urok, shattered like glass. The binding power ripped away, leaving only chaotic, violent fragments. Without the overwhelming psychic pressure of their supreme warlord to dominate and amalgamate the disparate tribes and clans, the Greenskins descended into a whirlwind of self-destruction, butchering each other with the same boundless, mindless energy they'd so recently directed at humanity. Ullanr was rendered utterly silent. Within a standard Terran year, Imperial forces had scoured the entire sector with brutal efficiency, mopping up the scattered, leaderless knots of Greenskins. Territory smothered under the Ork boot for centuries breathed the sterile, reclaimed air of Imperial control. In the echoing quietude of that hard-won peace, 7 years after the triumph, history twisted on its axis. The Emperor elevated Horus Lupercal to War Master, bestowing upon him supreme command of all Imperial military forces. The weight of this choice, made irrevocably noted in the glaring afterglow of the greatest Ork victory of the Great Crusade, defies measure. Horus had secured his place, in his father's vast mind, as the paragon among sons. Had the stars remained aligned, perhaps he would truly have led mankind to the extinction of the Greenskins. Instead, a poisoned blade awaited the heart of the Imperium. The very War Master would turn traitor, rending the nascent empire apart in the unthinkable heresy, bathing humanity in its own blood, fracturing the Emperor's vision, and crucially, leaving a galaxy shattered and weakened, ripe for the return of the Orks in numbers and ferocity unimaginable at Ullanr. Time erodes stone, scatters stars, but some wounds are too deep, too poisoned, to ever scar over, throb forever in the Imperium's psyche. The War of the Beast, erupting like a volcano in the tepid twilight of 544 M32, remains one of the most savage abysses into which humanity nearly slid, a cataclysm that consumed swathes of the realm in ruinous fire. I wasn't there, of course. Millennia separated my birth from that calamity. Yet duty compels understanding, so I've pieced together the tale from shards others overlooked fragments of scorched parchment hidden in vaults choked with dust, the mangled memories scraped from armored logs recovered amidst planetary graves, even whispers from dread archives accessed through paths whose disclosure would see me flayed. It began cloaked in murderer's banality. The Imperial fists, steadfast bastions in mustard yellow plate, dispatched to some insignificant world called Artamantua to perform pest control on a race of metallic-shelled insectoids known locally as chromes. Routine, another notch on the bolter's grip. Among their number marched battle brother Corrand, who penned a blithe missive to his mentor the night before the drop. "The men are in good spirits," he wrote with chilling innocence. "Captain Valor says the chromes will hardly put up a fight." Some of the newer brothers are almost disappointed. How those words claw at me now, almost like prophecy mocking the blind. When the drop pods shrieked through Artamantua's atmosphere, the disquiet began instantly, thick and cloying like cold sludge. The chromes weren't attacking, they were fleeing in pure, distilled terror, a chittering flood driven insane by something worse. Corrand's personal logs, salvaged later from his damaged armor unit, still resonate with his escalating dread. Strange tremors buckled the earth beneath ceramite boots. The sky above shimmered with unnatural distortions like heat haze gone mad. "Something's wrong here," his recorded voice grates, tense as whipcord. Brother Ganon collapsed during the dawn offertory. "Emperor preserve us. I've never seen a Librarian in such agony." Before the medikey reached him, he seized my wrist, his eyes weeping crimson trails, and whispered, "Giants, walking between stars." Then the sky itself turned to hate. An attack moon. A planetoid carved hollow, a defiled corpse fashioned into a fortress on an unimaginable scale, blotting out Artamantua's sun like a colossal, diseased pupil filled with incomprehensible malice. What followed was annihilation. The Imperial fists, glorious sons of Rogel Dorn himself, met a force of titanic, impossible orcs. These weren't the ragged, roaring mobs the Imperium knew. They were giants, their armor brutally advanced, their movements terrifyingly coordinated, custom work that defied Imperial science. Chapter Master Corland fell surrounded by the smoking ruin of the Landers, buying mere moments with his life. Only 4 bloodied survivors clawed their way back to escape, Corrand among them, lifted onto a medikey bier near death. As their straining transport ripped skyward, the last sight was the attack moon unleashing its gut-shaking fury, weapons cracking Artamantua's crust like rotten fruit, the planet screaming into its pyroclastic grave. Reaching Terra Nirdiing, the truth Corrand brought curdled into denial. The High Lords, those distant masters of mankind cocooned in marble and ignorance, dismissed his warnings with blithe arrogance. "Surely you exaggerate, Astartes? Lord Gardel, that insulated fool, reportedly sneered. The Orks are savages, nothing more. Their brittle belief lasted only until Lord Commander Militant Heth followed Corrin's path into the void towards the attack moon with his battle fleet and vanished into oblivion. Suddenly, chillingly, the Imperium understood it was next. Terra itself gazed upwards into the maw of the beast. In that moment of existential horror, Corrin, bearing the crushing, lonely burden of last Imperial fist, triggered Rogel Dorn's desperate last wall protocola contingency forged in grim forethought centuries prior for when Terra faced absolute extinction. The ancient, sleeping code pulsed out across the void, aching with the weight of 10,000 years of oaths meant never to be called upon. The successor chapters of the Fists, the zealous Black Templars, the stoic Crimson Fists, the wounded pride of the Excoriators, Lords of Siege and Shield, heard it with disbelief. It was like hearing your grandfather's voice thunder from a sealed tomb, wrote Chapter Master Isaac of the Excoriators later in brittle script. When I gathered my captains in the Chamber of Remembrance to deliver the summons, silence descended so completely, so profoundly, you could hear the votive candles sputter one by one in the heavy air. They answered, the Sons of the Lion came back, setting aside centuries of separation and fierce independence, shattering the sacred Codex Astartes that had ruled their order for millennia. What were rules against extinction? They gathered above Terra, a brotherhood of legends unheard since the age of Primarchs, silent titans shoulder-to-shoulder once more. Yet beneath that awe, the dreadful question hung unspoken, hammering like a funeral drum within every warrior heart. Would even this sacred union of titans stem the tide of the beast? Remember, they were people, these demigods, for all their genus-plissed might and battle conditioning. People with flaws and fierce hopes and dark doubts, preparing for what deep heritage whispered might be their final act upon humanity's stage. Behind them, clustered beneath the spires and within the manufactories, quadrillions of souls, the Imperium entire, stared skyward, the collective breath held as their fragile candle of civilization flickered against absolute dark. I recall my grandmother describing mass hysteria, the viral spread of pure fear through a population. When that obscene attack moon tore through the skin of the sky above Terra itself to hang there, a gargantuan, cyclopean eye watching humanity's cradle with patient malevolence, that's exactly how it felt. Panic, a physical, choking thing, swept like wildfire through the cavernous hive cities. People who'd spent lifetimes never raising their eyes skyward now couldn't tear their gaze away. Families hoarded pathetic bundles of possessions and fled streets choked with bodies seeking forgotten refuge, knowing nowhere was safe. Workers abandoned vital stations without orders. Prayers to the master of mankind became desperate screams echoing in packed refugic chapels, fervent pleas rising in a dissonant chorus from throats raw with terror. The arbitrators, monolithic in black plate and unyielding duty, formed thin lines against societal collapse, but even their cold eyes betrayed a flicker of visceral dread when they thought no civilian saw their gaze turned upwards. Above, in the gilded spires where high lords whispered policy, paralysis reigned. These stewards of the Imperium, wielding power by ancient decree, dissolved into petty squabbles over archaic diplomatic niceties, while annihilation watched them through atmospheric distortion. Watching them bicker was like frightened children arguing fiercely about who must look beneath the bed for the monster, all while its shadow falls across the door. It was precisely into this churning chaos that messengers of frightening audacity stepped forth. I call them heroes not for wisdom, they sorely lacked it, but for possessing the sheer nerve to attempt command while the High Lords floundered. Jaskina Tull, speaker for the Chartist captains who knit the Imperium together with their creaking hulls, her authority drawn solely from understanding the faceless multitudes below the spires. Beside her stood Ecclesiarch Messring, clad in robes heavy with millennia-old significance, bearers of sacred oils and holy words, undeniably terrified despite the trappings of divine authority. Together, they birthed an idea both insane and heartbreakingly sincere: the proletarian crusade. Not legions of Astartes or guardsmen, but a tide of terrified, faithful citizens, miners and clerks, students and street vendors armed with whatever could be scraped from forgotten armories, hurled against the attack moon supported by skeletal Imperial Navy remnants. Corrin, the one man who knew firsthand the foe's monstrous reality, fought them with all his immense will. In a private audience with Tull, it said the towering Astartes placed a gauntlet heavy enough to crush rock gently on her shoulder, his augmented voice resonant with conviction. "These are not warriors," he declared, crushing innocence in his words. "They forge bread and butcher carcasses, mold young minds and transcribe decad ledgers. You send them unto slaughter, nothing less." Tull, eyes burning with defiant faith, whispered back, "They are the Emperor's people. Are they not entitled to die fighting for their homes?" Both held shards of terrible truth. But potent alchemy brewed among the populace, fear shaking their bones, faith burning in their hearts, stirred to frenzy by charismatic desperation. Soon the decree echoed across Terra. Millions answered its siren call of oblivion. For years, I've gathered the fractured testimonies of the precious few who crawled back from that hellscape spun with organizing lace-webbing blood vapor. Sergeant Albrecht Durin's militia journal, simple and stark, cleaves the tragedy open bare. "We filled the assembly square near the deadened manufactorum." His words etched themselves into my mind. Such a brutal collection of souls, young lads aflame with zeal, scarred veterans limping on bent crutches, mothers kissing tiny brows and choking back tears with promises of return, an elderly padre pushed in a rusted chair by his daughter, both adamant they belonged in the Emperor's vanguard. They issued us ancient things. Clap-it-out lasguns some wrinkled quartermaster found buried deep, still bore regimental serials scratched centuries hence. Mine had TCK carved deep in the worn stockwood. Who was he? Did he die brave? Priesthood clustered among us, anointing bolters and rifles still slick with decades of grime, slick oil on sweating foreheads. "The Emperor protects," they chanted through trembling voices. "The Emperor protects." We echoed it back, the words burning hollow in our throats. The terrible beauty of the true character of the galaxy revealed itself in that moment on board one of those countless, creaking vessels bound for the Ork attack moon. It clung to fragility like ship cobwe /think 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 think here. The ship's groan vibrated not. We construct the reply as, rewritten version per instruction here. The metal deck, shuddering beneath my worn boots, vibrated every tooth in my skull. A physical counterpoint to the choked cacophony, filling the converted free, here the gravitic whips lived, tearing at the imperial void ships like invisible claws of a mad god. Ripping adamantium hulls asunder with contemptuous ease, even as support systems failed across the broken monstrosity they all fought upon. It was into this maelstrom of insane technology and primal violence that the Terminators materialized, veterans armored in the ancient suits teleporting directly onto the undulating surface of the Ork attack moon. A century of battlefield calculus unfolded within their auto-senses in the instant of materialization, targeting solutions already painting hostile vectors across their visor displays, even as they sank slightly into the unnervingly pliant ground. Behind the imposing silhouettes of these battle-scarred demigods came the roar of thunderhawks, disgorging battle tanks whose cannon fire bloomed against the chaotic landscape. And alongside them marched the implacable Legio Cybernetica automatons, their movements precise and chillingly silent trapezoidal heads swiveling to scan for targets. Moving amidst this orchestrated deployment of destruction walked Mago's Dominus Jijoku, his limbs modified into potent weapon appendages, yet his true purpose, the core of his being, pulsed with the need to observe, to dissect, to understand the technological blasphemy unfolding around him. Fragments of his Latira-covered datatronics reveal a mind on the precipice of collapse under the weight of the impossible. He recorded, his internal voice trembling on the data crypt, "I have served the Omnissiah for 372 years. I have cataloged the echoes of the Dark Age, vivisected Xeno's tech patterns from 47 distinct species, and communed with machine spirits of the highest transcendent order. What inhabits this anomaly defies all known paradigms. The substructure beneath this sacrilegious hull responds to stimuli with organic reactivity, reconfiguring in patterns that mock predictive algorithm, while power generation violates 3 immutable laws of thermodynamics. Most horrifying, the teleportation matrices. They operate without prophylactic Geller shielding despite breaching reality's veil into the immaterium. I experience something unfamiliar, akin to the religious awe organics describe. This confluence of impossibilities should collapse upon itself, a tangled heap of shattered logic. Yet it stands. It thrives. The greenskins possess no comprehension of its function. They merely expect it to work, and, somehow, perversely, reality acquiesces. Yet, for the warriors locked in that screaming hellscape of distorted physics and blunt orc savagery, survival eclipsed philosophical dread. The Xenos they faced were titanic brutes, towering over even the Geneforged space marines, wielding crude yet brutally potent weapons that punched through legendary Terminator plate like cheap ceramite. Their numbers were inexhaustible, a relentless tide surging through constantly flaring teleportation portals linking back to the vast sprawl of the beast's empire. Brother Torvald of the Crimson Fists discovered isolation's sharp edge when a section of the living moon itself heaved upwards, forming an instant craggy barrier separating him from his squad. For 6 soul-crushing hours, he fought alone amidst the alien architecture. Each precious bolt casing expended a step closer to oblivion, his blessed armor groaning, power flickering and failing incrementally, pressing his transhuman endurance to its absolute edge. He would recount this impossible struggle years later in chapter Remembrancer Archives, a quiet reverence coloring his words, speaking less of personal heroism and more of the startling arrival of reinforcements crossing the barrier. The Iron Knights, their arrival timed after the initial assault wave had stalled. These fresh Astartes, clad in brutalist gray plate, brought the momentum necessary for a final, desperate spearhead. A strike team fought its apocalyptic way towards, and successfully disrupted, the attack moon's primary teleportation plexus. The endless flow of orc reinforcements, finally, agonizingly, stemmed. The critical objective was achieved, yet at ruinous cost. Casualties mounted by the minute, the very air thick with the stench of promethium, scorched ceramite, and spilt blood both orc and imperial. With the impossible moon grievously wounded but far from slain, the beast bloodied but roaring in defiance, the Imperial commanders ordered the grim symphony of strategic withdrawal. As the evacuation gathered pace, Iron Knight's chaptermaster Malans made his final, silent choice. Ordering his battle brothers to the thunder of departing gunships, he remained behind, anchored to the quaking surface with a minute honor guard, a sovereign decision to hold a vital choke point against the inevitable green tide. His sacrifice bought vital moments. Witnesses aboard ships clawing away from the wounded moon glimpsed a final, blinding spear of purest light erupt from its surface, Malans triggering his armor's core overload, dragging dozens of the beast's elite warriors screaming into the abyss with him. The withdrawal complete, the survivors limped back towards Terra, hearts heavy with loss, perhaps anticipating acknowledgement for the staggering damage inflicted upon an impossible foe. Instead, they stepped directly into the labyrinth of imperial politics, a place far more treacherous than the guns of the attack moon. What awaited them wasn't celebration, but betrayal veiled under protocol. In the fractious chambers that witnessed the breaking point between the Adeptus Astronomicon and the High Lords, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, Yudo Mayudo, delivered not accolades, but condemnation. The Space Marine commanders, leaders of the greatest chapters united against the beast, listened in icy silence as Yudo berated their formation as a borderline heretical legion-sized force. Worse, far worse under the apocalyptic shadow descending upon humanity, came his command: prohibition of any further strikes against the wounded but still lethal attack moon. This stupefying edict, he claimed, originated from the fabricator General Coriel Zeth herself. Corund, last son of the dawn or perhaps the dusk, lastard Parnet of the Imperial Fists, endured the admonishment with preternatural patience. But later, confiding in the ever-watchful Vangorich, even his transhuman composure had strained near breaking. Outrage, betrayal, the crushing awareness of extinction's nearness, they coalesced into ruthless action. Corund, in the wound-tight, suffocating days that followed, chose a path blazed by Guilliman himself millennia before. With careful cultivation of allies Draken Vangorich's cold cunning, inquisitorial Representative Veritas's authority, Provist Marshal Verno's unquestioning fealty, he orchestrated a bloodless, but earth-shattering, political coup. Instruments of swift justice silenced dissent without open war. When the last Voxgrief faded, and the dust settled amidst the empty senatorial halls, it was Corund who occupied the stratagem helm of humanity. The Lord Commander of the Imperium once again possessed the genetic signature and indoctrination of a Space Marine legionary, as it had not since the days of the great crusading Primarchs. Across Terra, citizen masses huddled beneath flickering public horologs, watching stiffly official pick captures of the Ascension ceremony. Corund stood rigid, imperturbable, the weight of the terrible gold mantle of supremacy settling upon broad shoulders already burdened by foreknowledge. Within moments, reverence curdled into desolation. He understood the cosmic millstone he now carried. In fleeting moments of isolation, armored fingers would trace familiar scars lining his face, the ache like distant stars, a visceral bridge back to simpler times amidst the brotherhood of squad tactica, where the only calculus was orders executed and enemies slain. Now, the navigational chart stretched before him encompassed every star, every soul of humanity, and extinction roared louder each day on the solar wind. His vast power felt like chains, and his first monumental challenge slithered from the unexpected, bureaucratic dark. Her name was Eliza Veron, merely a cipher clerk buried deep within the Officio Assassinorum's suffocating data stacks. Not a warrior, barely even a cog, just a person whose life revolved around deciphering encrypted comm signals and fetching the ubiquitous bitter recaf for shadowy superiors. But Eliza noticed. Patterns deviated from official Martian transmissions like a leaking plasma conduit, subtle discrepancies accumulating into chilling suspicion like hoarfrost on neglected glass. Fear kept her silent for days, gnawing at her resolve, the potential for catastrophic error, a constant specter. She remembered later, her eyes unfocused, seeing that sterile office again, hushed and shadowed, illuminated only by the screens. The cleaning servitors ignored her silent concentration as she spread the damning transcripts like tarot cards of doom. The final, horrible mosaic became clear at dawn, a truth so vast and cold it stole her breath, leaving only shivers in its wake. The certainty was absolute. She couldn't remain silent, consequences be damned. The tendrils of heresy Eliza exposed, painstakingly documented and passed through terrified hands, eventually coursed to Vangorich, and finally to Corund. Mars, cradle of knowledge, bastion of the Mechanicus, humanity's technological lifeline, had plunged a cognitive dagger into the Imperium's spine. Tech priests high within Olympus Mons weren't merely hoarding secrets. They were actively pursuing an unthinkable heresy, plotting to teleport the entire red planet instantly away from the Sol system, abandoning Terra to its fate should the beast prevail. And the treachery metastasized. A senior adept named Eldon Idex had grasped knowledge pertaining to the beast's terrifying origins. Knowledge adjudicated so dangerously revelation-sponsive, he had personally ordered the slaying of a covert Officio Assassinorum investigatory team sent to uncover his vaults on Terra. This final insidious twist struck Corund with the force of a battle cannon shell. Betrayal not just by greed or ambition, but by those tasked with safeguarding humanity's very means of survival, all while the nightmare pressed ever closer. Conciliation dissolved instantly. A heavy heart, burdened by the iron grasp of necessity, drew the newly crowned Lord Commander from the echoing chamber of the Senatorum Imperialis, seeking the trusted nod of Maximus Thane, chapter master of the Fists Exemplar. In a smaller chamber, shielded against auspex and eavesdropper alike, Corund spoke softly despite the enhancement that could crack stone. "Thane, I need an arm I can grasp without hesitation amidst this maelstrom. Go to Mars. Extract the tech priest Eldon Idex. He must face the interrogation glow of the Ordo tech priests. But Maximus?" He paused, his hand, strong enough to crush plasteel, resting on his battle brother's pauldron, conveying a shared agony. Utilize every fiber of discretion. Avoid bloodshed. A firefight with the Martian priesthood would be the pyre upon which humanity will immolate itself. The stark crimson sands of Mars received Thane's task force not as kinsmen in crisis, but as invaders. Arrayed before the landing zone stood a formidable assembly of the Mechanicus Skidari maniples, grimly silent beneath a sky the color of dried blood. At their head stood artisan Argus Van Allen, a being whose sanctified biological remnants were merely islands of scarred flesh amidst gleaming chrome and whining actuators, over a century and a half devoted to the machine god, rendering him nearly as alien as the Ork machiniture they fought. The confrontation was a lesson in stark minimalism, a masterclass in cold protocols stretched to the screaming point. The Skidari held their line, modified bodies incapable of betraying mammalian fear or flicker of hesitation, yet their manipulators were taut, perfectly poised inches from trigger studs gleaming like malevolent eyes. Opposite them, The Space Marines advanced with Thunderhawk engines roaring overhead. Step by heavy step, bolt gun muzzles lowered in impenetrable discipline, but eyes locked, tracking potential fire lanes. Neither faction desired this conflict. The Mechanicus understood its blasphemously essential role, the Astartes understood annihilation's shadow looming ever closer. Yet neither faction could retreat without irrevocable loss of honor, purpose, face. It hinged on impossible tension, a filament of ceramite thinner than air. The fragile strand snapped with the metallic shriek of an overwrought defense system. An immense honored Dunnacrawler, its sacred machine spirit perhaps misinterpreted hostile maneuvering patterns, spat a sparking, superheated bolt of dark energy. It connected with an incoming fist's exemplar drop pod as it broke low Martian atmosphere. The resulting detonation smashed reality. A shockwave rolled across the red plains like a physical wall of thunder, followed instantly by the horrifically distinctive celestial sound of ceramite shards striking plasteel bunkers. Instinct prevailed over reason. Adept and Astartes alike snapped into reflexive defensive positions, weapons snapping up, targeting auspex screaming digital hymns of death. For 37 agonizing seconds, an eternity measured in the clenching of synth muscles, fingers tightened over triggers, target locks pulsing crimsonth Imperium itself hung over a precipice of civilizational suicide. Oblivion as mutual assured destruction. Thane acted where others calculated the odds. He stood tall among his suddenly still brothers and raised gauntleted fingers to his helmet seals. The hiss of decompression brake breach silenced the rending wind as he removed it fully, exposing his biological face to the gathering dust and the laser-burnished gaze of every opposing Skidari. His voice, amplified by inbuilt rock cutters within his battle plate, tore across the wasteland. We disembark not as conquerors wielding blades, nor as executioners enacting punitive sentence. We advance seeking knowledge, not Martian secrets, but truths paramount enough to save Terra, to save Mars, to preserve the very possibility of humanity in the galaxy's vastness. His unguarded face, the ultimate act of vulnerability in warrior culture, became an icon of raw desperation. Will you deny us, deny all worlds, for secrets learned in fear? Across the static-riddled plain and channels, arguments died. Logic flickered where blind duty reigned. Then, across all frequencies simultaneously grating into vox grills, bioimplants, and skull-mounted receivers, a voice cut through cold, resonant, and undeniably Olympian. Fabricator General Quandal III himself, responding under immense political pressure and Corinth's grim ultimatums. The holy message echoed its algorithm-like clarity: cease aggression. Cooperate. Unity is logical fallacy prevention. Division anthropomorphizes failure. Van Allen witnessed this hieratic decree shudder through his undercommanders. Slowly at first, then deliberately, the coiled mechadendrites mounted upon his back subsided from attack posture. An ancient martial order vibrated across the linked neural webs of the Skidara cadres. Weapons systems whirred down, recognizing the new combat parameters. Van Allen intoned, his voice a grinding processor. The Omnissiah's sacred will sings within logic's chorus. Logic dictates that internal conflict solely serves to hasten complete systemic degradation. Stand-down protocols initiated. The tide of mutual destruction receded like polluted water leaving rust. The confrontation ended. The knife-and-hilt moment passed unbloodied by Astartes or Omnissiah adherent. Ibex was produced his form already partially forsaken by the cult Mechanicus. Limbs and torso surrendered to become a servitor-like mockery. Deemed punishment, wearing the guise of sanctity for his unforgivable research on Terra. The adherents spiriting him to imperial sanction appeared deeply uncomfortable acknowledging him as once one of their own. From the fragmented electrochemical sludge within Idex's pitiful remainsa mind, broken by ritual dismemberment, masquerading as cyberthugy xenology xenosomatists tore critical information, pulsed through encoded synapses. The home world of the beast emerged like an assiged glyph, Ullener. The name resonated like a dropped relic within imperial memory. Primarch Horus raised to Warmaster, the apotheosis of the Great Crusade's glory on that very soil. That sacred soil, nurturing now the creeping root of humanity's ultimate annihilation, felt like history's cruelest just echoing across time. Or perhaps a throbbing, ignored scar finally manifesting its deep cancer. Corinth, leveraging the precarious crafter pact, forged with Quandle following the averted schism, mobilized the command throne with terrifying finality. The summons crackled across the fragmented Imperium, a voxknit rallying cry of unprecedented scope demanding the gathering at Terra. A crusade unto the beast's source. A crusade for Allur. Iconic chapters folded into the astrophysics chart, the gleaming angelic hosts of Baal gliding into orbit beside stoic dark angel warships. The howling wolves Fenrisian approach vectors aligning with the clinically planned transits of Ultramar. Great vessels braved a warp stirred to tempestuous fury by the psychic echo of the beast's rampancy. Amid frantic preparations, flooding Terra's lunar docks and massive subterranean forges clanging like metallic heartbeats, Khorne sought stillness. Deep in the stratagem, alone save for the projected star chart where Ullanr pulsed malevolently, he allowed exhaustion to sag his posture, his enhanced musculature notwithstanding. The crushing mass of command felt gravitational. A pulse-silent knock penetrated the Imperial quiet settling over the chamber. Eliza Veron stood at the threshold, clutching a heavy data slate with hands accustomed to pylons, her cipher clerk robes seeming painfully out of place in the presence tasked with protecting worlds. "My lord," she spoke without stumbling, the drumbeat of ingrained protocol still her armor despite palpable trepidation, addressing divinity incarnate. The latest astrotelepath dispatches manifest anomalies requiring your immediate attention. As Khorne scanned the dense flow of encoded imagery and casualty estimates leaking from distant war zones battling the beast's lashing tendrils, Eliza found her gaze captured by details unimagined during the endless night of her decryption vigil. She perceived the drawn skin beneath piercing eyes, the barely concealed hollowness papering itself over warrior resolve, ancient scars standing livid tracery declaring exhaustion deeper than mere genetic enhancement could mitigate. He was Geneforged perfection straining beneath a load that bent stars. "My lord," the question escaped her lips, surprising her as much as it echoed her nights of fear in the sterile office. Can we win?" She instantly looked down at the data slate, mortification burning her neck. Khorne's imposing gaze shifted, for an instant stripped of strategic overview, and settled upon her, the ordinary mortal cipher lost amidst intricate subterfuge and galactic power. He saw the lines of fear underlying courage, the trembling hands that had exposed Mechanicus treason not for glory but duty. In Eliza, like a distilled archetype, resided the quintessence of the relentless, grinding persistence of humanity's billions. Small lives lived amidst galactic dread, enduring terror, trusting their protectors. His answer, low and measured, resonated with unexpected gravity. Victory isn't merely possible. It is our singular imperative. Not for august thrones, not for abstract imperiums, but for every delicate existence like you, Eliza Veron. For every soul clinging to flame on Mars. For every life beneath Terra's shadowed spires, clinging still to light. Preparation surged onwards into the knife point of final night. On Luna's silent surface, and deep within Martian reservoirs of forgotten technology, weapons flashed and ground, void shield tactics merged across ancient rivals. Space Marines kneeled in silent prayer or practiced killing motions sharpened over 10 millennia. They would surge out towards Ullanr not torn asunder. A unity fragile yet blood-sealed in necessity against the beast, a hard-won unity achieved through corridors of treachery, sacrifice, and sudden blades narrowly averted. Now flickering bright despite exhaustion's crushing toll, pressing heaviest upon the lonely, scarred figure pacing beneath star-map balefire. And somewhere, in the horrifically expanded silence between impenetrable war lanes leading to a world named Ullanr, might coalesce near-divine and grotesque. The beast stirred, glorying in its rise, its anchorate dominance stretching across its vast empire, fundamentally unaware that its deepest weapon, humanity's inherent fission, the agony of divergent human hearts had itself been overcome. Not by overwhelming firepower, but through uneasy alliances whispered into existence amidst paranoia, the quiet desperation of loyalty remaining amid betrayal, arguments narrowly avoiding war by sacrifice of displayed human features, and the terrible, ungilded courage found within lowly cipher clerks noticing discrepancies within mountains of irrelevance. Sometimes change arrives not as wrathful lightning, even amongst galaxies consumed by war, but as a fragile, impossible whisper passed through chaos. The murmurs moved first through the dim, strained air of the inquisitorial chambers, shadows deepened by the weight they now bore, carried on lips hesitant, almost fearful of the very syllables. It coiled like smoke from a dying forge, this impossible truth, until it reached the stark, unadorned quarters of Lord Commander Korvac, whispered into the ears of a soul whose burdens were etched as deeply as the fatigue lines on his face. A Primarch lives. Inquisitorial Representative Veritas, his grim visage momentarily softened by something akin to disbelief, something perilously close to wonder, had delivered the words. Vulcan walks among us still. In the small, brittle hours following that revelation, only a single lamp burned in Corrin's sparse refuge, its weak light pooling on a scene weighted with centuries of loss and uncountable sorrows. The last son of dawn stood at his viewport, a dark shape against the starfield, absorbing the inconceivable. Far, far away on a world whispered as Caldera, distant from blessed Terra's numinous light, one of the Emperor's own sons, a Titan thought ground to dust upon the immense wheel of history, had been sighted. Vulcan, father of the mighty salamanders, was locked in a solitary, desperate crucible, waging war against the monstrous tide of the beast. Later, tacticians would dissect the raw military significance, plotting vectors and resource needs, but what echoes loudest through the recollections and broken, cherished accounts of those who endured that era was the raw, primal hunger for a savior. A figure wrenchingly larger than reality, a legend forged into flesh, capable of imposing meaning upon their ocean of meaningless agony, of turning their rising tide of despair back upon itself. When the Imperial fleet finally broke the orbital blockade and descended upon Caldera, they found a world wheezing its last. The sky above was a screaming, twisting canvas of unnatural forces, constellations of malevolent light rupturing the firmament. Below, the jaws of the Ork invaders clamped ever tighter around the pitiful, shattered remnants of human resistance. By any calculation, by any sane measure of attrition and horror, the defenders should have been ground into paste months before. Yet against the rational darkness, they clung on, embers stubbornly refusing to die. And at their core, around whom their faltering lines improbably coalesced, stood a figure whose very silhouette defied the crumbling world. A pillar. Sister Mara Lanville, tending the maimed and the dying in a makeshift field hospital reeking of antiseptic, corruption, and hopelessness, captured those impossible moments not in tactical reports, but in frantic pencil scratches in the precious blank margins of her spiraled medical log, words pressed onto the page between courses of tourniquets and murmured last rites. We had all grown up with stories, she scrawled, her usually meticulous script jagged now with bone-deep weariness or a tremoring she couldn't name. The Emperor's sons. They were distant constellations, myths recited in catechism, figures on crumbling stained-glass mosaics. Nothing, Earth Mother bless me, nothing could brace me for the reality. I first saw him returning from the broken eastern perimeter, where the green tide had almost swept all before it into ruin. He moved. He moved like lightning condensed, impossible agility housed in a scale that dwarfed even our sturdiest Armet tanks. That colossal Warhammer trailed arcs of sizzling energy that cut the pre-dawn murk into sharp relief, a painter's furious stroke across the canvas of destruction. His skin glistened like the deepest, most profound obsidian, seeming to soak in the very light of the exploding shells bursting all around him, while his eyes, they held a fire, a furnace fire. But not terrifying. No. Somehow profoundly comforting, a calm core of incandescent certainty amidst the roaring chaos. When his voice, bearing the iron weight of Olympus itself, thundered across the blood-stained mud, calling a broken rabble of retreating defenders to stand fast, Lyra, you should have seen them. Men who seconds before were fleeing in blind, gibbering animal terror, they simply stopped. They turned. They went back, clawing their way back into the charnel furnace, reforged by a word. Then between the monstrous grind of assaults, I saw the Primarch with the wounded. This demigod, this engine of obliteration, knelt beside men whose lives were ebbing into crimson mud. Those enormous blacksmith's hands, capable of shattering ceramite, were impossibly gentle as he cradled shattered limbs. He spoke to every single dying soul, stared into every fading gaze as if that soldier, that fading spark, was the sole, precious purpose of his being in that awful moment. Listening to final messages whispered for wives on worlds forever unreachable, for children who would never know their fathers, promising to remember names, ordinary names that history, vast and cold, would inevitably forget. Watching him, understanding flooded me like purging fire. I understood then why the salamanders hold compassion as a sacred combat virtue. In Vulcan, they weren't wrestled concepts. They were the same soul force expressed the power to care, with volcanic fury for the innocent and absolute stillness for the dying. It was all one. Strength forged in the furnace of empathy. The moment Lord Commander Korvac finally stood face to face with this returned demigod, this myth choked free from legend's tomb, etched itself on every witness as a recognition deeper than genetics. Two warriors burdened with the crushing weight of mankind's survival. Though one bore a chapter's remnants, the other the echoing ghost of an entire brotherhood. Their shared lineage a silent conversation held beyond words amidst the cloying stench of war. Their subsequent audience, crammed into a reinforced bunker rocking with distant artillery, shattered all expectations. Vulcan absorbed the reports from the wider Imperium, the horrific tally of foes, the world screaming silent into the void. Terra itself besieged his face, growing heavier by the syllable, like stone sinking into abyssal depths. Yet when Korvac, representing a desperate galaxy, pleaded for the Primarch to return to lead the rallied crusade against the beast, the refusal was gentle, implacable, chillingly simple. "I have sworn to protect these people," he said, a vast hand encompassing the fractured ruins of the settlement groaning around them under the alien sky. Caldera hangs by a thread above utter eradication. The Greenskins have built a device, a gravitic generator. It tears this world apart muscle by muscle, bone by bone. They seek to make a thing of horror, a new moon carved from human agony. I will not abandon them. Instead of argument, Korvac offered fists, steel, gunships. The Imperial forces would stand shoulder-to-bulging shoulder with the Primarch. Together, they would break Caldera's back. Only then, but only then, would the desperate needs of the throne world be spoken of again. The battle they waged was Tempest unleashed. Ork technology wove visible distortions into the very fabric of reality, a shifting, nausea-inducing haze warping solid rock and spewing impossible energies. At the climax, frozen as a tableau of impossible courage, Vulcan, his form brilliant with unleashed power, hurled himself into the grinding, impossible heart of the gravitational abomination. The cataclysmic overload consumed the device in a starburst of tortured energy, yet somehow left the Primarch standing amidst the ruins, miraculously, defiantly alive. The tone of the journey back to the throne world resonated on an entirely different chord. It wasn't the frantic, clutching claw of desperate hope that had propelled the outbound convoy into the abyss like terrified swallows fleeing winter. This was something quieter, deeper, purged by catharsis, yet thrumming with borrowed power. Ships began apparating beside their convoy like moths drawn to a newly kindled flame. Astropathic messages, crass and lyrical, raw and detailed, pulsed outwards through the shimmering cosmic void. News spread faster than plague. For the first time in a generation groaning under the slow press of atrocity, citizens on hollowed-out agri-worlds and fortress shives ringing with sirens suddenly heard themselves using a long-lost word: victory. Not a Piantheschi delusion whispered in shelters, but a tangible thing, a solid possibility newly unleashed, carried in the silent wake of a black giant. Vulcan's actual arrival on Terra wasn't a political ceremony. It shattered bloody reality itself. Millions teemed along the processional route from the colossal spaceport portals to the spires of the Imperial Palace, a massed outcry of humanity. Stunned into awed silence, or pouring their centuries of compressed grief, terror, and newborn defiance into ancient hymns long crushed by the weight of the tyrant's shadow. Children, small enough to feel the storm of emotion without fear, were hauled onto shoulders for the fleeting glimpse of such impossible hope made manifest. Veterans, their immaculate uniforms heavy with decades of scars visible and hidden, openly lamented, remembering campfire tales suddenly, miraculously, impossibly occupying physical reality. Inside the cyclopean edifice of the Imperial Palace, Vulcan convened with the High Lords, the air pregnant with centuries of institutional rot and barely leashed hostility. Witnesses recount the meeting's electric tension, a Primarch offering criticism without tempering, his voice an avalanche dissecting strategic failures and highlighting profound moral rot. Yet, brutal as his honesty was, vengeance wasn't the weapon he chose. He didn't purge the towers with fire or demand heads roll. The real purge was happening outside, written across the faces of millions upon millions whose hope, newly ignited, felt brighter than any exonerate decree. 3 days later. The rekindled Imperial faith, forged entirely on the anvil of one supernal being, departed Terra as Imperial might personified. Thousands upon thousands of ships, every cruiser, every escort, every dark frigate and immense battle barge assembled since the cataclysmic fall formed an unstoppable armada. At its radiant, terrifying core flew the assault craft belonging to Vulcan himself, bearing within it not just a Primarch of the Emperor, but the deft, fragile, desperate, newly reignited hope of humanity, burning fiercely after so many years choking in utter darkness. Journeys exist that sear themselves upon your soul, etching marks no surgeon's tools could probe, but perhaps even deeper than the physical craters left by bolter shells or chainswords. The voyage to Anor was not merely such a journey. It was that experience multiplied across billions of desperate psyches. It changed everyone who lived it and reshaped humanity itself in some fundamental, irrevocable way. Over decades, I pieced together testimony dogered journals smelling of despair and battlefield dust, faded letters penned with shaking hands, Vox recordings where voices cracked with ghosts of remembered horror, weaving the human tapestry behind the cold formal pronouncements of the stratagem logs that listed it merely as another muster point, another territory reclaimed, another campaign. Navigator Thelma Voss knew she violated strict house edicts by keeping her journal. Navigator dynasties guarded their secrets and terrors with the cold jealousy of dragons guarding hordes. But what she witnessed, what she felt surging through the immaterium around their fleet, demanded more than sterile navigational notations. It deserved the tremor those final sparks flickering inside the Gargant weren't sunlight. They were the last desperate fires of hope dashed against the Orc war machine's adamantium heart. The suicidal drop of the veterans into its ruptured belly devolved into a grim harvest as the remaining Crimson Fists and Ultramarines fought through corridors slick with viscera and coolant. They reached the cavernous central chamber, only to find oblivion already waiting. The beast stood like a cathedral of scarred mega-armor 10 meters tall, all furnace-glow eyes and grinding pistons. Its iron-shod fists moved with terrifying economy. Chapter Master Kadra fell mid-below, his Terminator plate caved in like tin. Odious followed seconds later, a contemptuous backhand shattering ceramite and spine. The air turned thick with defeat, thicker than the acrid smoke. Then Vulcan moved, not with rage but a heavy, deliberate grace. Corvus Corax saw it in the Primarch's shoulders, the set of his jaw beneath the battered helm not vengeance, but a terrible resolve to end it, whatever the cost. No. The denial roared silently in Corvus's mind, a counterpoint to his own shouted command cracking across the Voxnet, overriding Boham's fury and appeals. Withdraw, now! Veteran Sergeant Taurus, his own leg mangled but functional, dragged a crimson-fisted brother towards the exit heaving blast doors. He spared one last look back, a glance etched into his dying mind like acid burns on steel. The beast, impossibly, its vox-grind echoing with cold, perfect Gothic cutting through the clamor. You are nothing. Your father failed. Your species is finished. Vulcan's laugh wasn't mockery. It rolled deep, resonant, bearing an impossible, ruinous weight of sorrowful mirth, as if the greatest monster in the galaxy had just told a fragile joke only children found funny. Then came the lunge, a titanic clash that shook the deck plates, Primarch and Beast locked in an embrace of mutual destruction. Vulcan drove them backwards, a runaway locomotive aimed at the pulsing, shrieking heart of the power core. Decades later, confined within his life-sustaining throne of iron and pain, Sergeant Taurus would whisper to Odd initiates the final vision that haunted his endless twilight. Vulcan's face in that final plummeting second. Not hatred's burn, not fear's pallor. Something infinitely worse, infinitely purer. Compassion. A boundless pity for the ignorance shackling the vast horror falling beside him into the blinding white void. The light consumed them. The explosion ripped the Gargant's core outward, annihilating the chamber, silencing the beast, shattering the greenskin command structure into panicked fragments. Victory. A husk carved from flesh and sacrifice. The Imperial remnants crawled back towards terror, the void of space echoing the hollow space where Vulcan's presence had been. 10,000 empty suits of armor. A fleet limping home through a pyre of their own making. Relief should have kissed the sands of Terra as the ragged fleet bled back into orbit, a weary sigh breathed across the throne world. Instead, a different exhalation filled the Vox channels, the public squares. Every desperate Griddlestiff's personal conveyed a guttural, rhythmic pulse that vibrated in the teeth, echoed in the skull. I am slaughter. I am slaughter. I am slaughter. Terror iced the spine of the Imperium. Relief curdled into visceral dread, thick and choking. Eliza Hartman, crouched over flickering tactical screens deep within the palatial data vaults, felt it sink into her marrow. The chant wasn't just bandwidth noise, it gnawed. Blocking frequencies, she scrawled later on a scavenged data slate, her hand trembling, channel shifts, whole array shutdowns, useless. It slithers through gaps we can't seal. Sarah, my roommate, she's broken. 3 days, more. She rocks in the corner, nails digging into her own ears, whispering it back, mimicking the rhythm. In the ventilator's drone, in paper crumpling. Is that whispering me, or my own pulse? Madness blooming in the heart of humanity. Alone in the deep night, bathed only in the cold luminescence of hololith projection, Corvus Corax stared at the flickering galaxy map. Red infestation bloomed like necrotic sores across worlds. The weight of Vulcan's sacrifice, the billion souls consumed on Anner, the uncountable screams choked off by the beast's distant kin, it hammered down, grinding away at the ceramite beneath his skin. Archivist Thelen found him like that, the Lord Commander silhouetted against a tapestry of failure and fire. His eyes, Thelen murmured later, so tired, not the body's exhaustion, something deeper, the soul's exhaustion. Corax didn't flinch or dismiss him. The question, raw and unexpected, emerged from the hololith's glow. Do you have a family, Thelen? A hesitant mention of a sister, nephews on Pacificus Prime met a slow, weary nod. Then you understand what we're fighting for. The words hung, less statement than agonized prayer. Thelen witnessed it, then the man inside the legend, buckling under the weight of trillions of fragile lives like his sisters, lost in screams and pulped bone. That burden demanded action. Vorich, Grand Master of Assassins, found himself summoned by that bone-deep weariness. Fragments whispered through adamantium doors to Korak listening outside. We cannot win this war as we've fought others. Korax's voice was steel dragged over gravel. It adapts, learns, every fleet we build it counters, every strategy it corrupts. Vorich's query lingered. What then? Not poison blades, not hidden killers, something alien to the beast's brutal calculus. Small teams, elite. Drawn across chapters. A fusion of traditions, skills, secrets. A scalpel, never a hammer. A shield, permanent for all such devils. The tremors started before the proposal was formally uttered. The Senator Imperiali's chamber echoed with outrage amplified by pristine acoustics. Toys Echar, his parchment-pale face rigid, invoked the sacred letter of the Codex as holy writ. Concentrated power? Transchapter bonds? Madness. Heresy's shadow looms over this very concept. The prohibition felt absolute, insurmountable. Ecclesiarch meaning swayed with frenzied zealotry. The Emperor's own hand sundered the legions. His divine will manifest. To fracture that decree, even for expediency, invites his eternal damnation. Van Gorick offered the sole vote. Kulek and Veritas sat frozen behind masks of careful neutrality, the political fear staler than the recycled air. Corax weathered the storm, the carved lines of his face deepening. Stalemate. Impending extinction felt abstract to power brokers safe upon Terra's throne. Then the skies screamed again. The dormant attack moon over Terra lit up. Gateway wounds scarred into its hide, seamlessly healed as living tissue. Fresh, obscenely large greenskin warships vomited forth, swarming the ancient satellite like maggots on celestial carrion. And cutting through the frantic voxnits, amplifying the dread chorus already fraying nerves across the planet, blared the beast's promise. I am slaughter. Omnipotent, personal, terrifying. Fear dissolved political postures. Existential dread proved the ultimate argument. The High Lords reconvened under the newly pulsating shadow. Panic etched grooves into faces accustomed to aloof control. Tradition crumbled before annihilation. A reluctant, grudging vote passed with trembling hands. The radical creation, sanctioned only by sheer terror, was born. The survivors of Anner were summoned. Haunted men. Brothers who'd walked alongside Vulcan's shadow, smelled Kadra's and Odius's lifeblood on scorched stone, felt the psychic aftershock of the Primarch's sacrifice, fled the chant's birth throes. Space wolves stood rigid beside dark angels. Salamander green brushed against the stark white of excoriators. Fists were balled inside ceramite fists, all gathered aboard the phalanx. Solemnity choked the expansive hall hung with Sigismund's bloody banners. One by one, in utter, respectful silence punctuated only by the whirring of recording servitors, Battle Brothers stepped towards platforms. Paint-stripping solvents hissed. Rich chapter colors bled away beneath brushes. The iconoclast fade of the crimson fists vanished, consumed by black. The gleaming sable and white cross of the Templars darkened into void. Imperial fist thunderbolts swallowed by an all-consuming dark. articulated fingers dipped back into pigment, unmolested now by heraldic stricture. Only the silvered left pauldron remained, blank as the tomb, awaiting sigil. It felt like burial. Despite ceremony, despite sacred oaths spoken into the silence, the refectory meal crackled with fugitive tension. Expecting silent communion, Corax and the assembled captains witnessed an unforeseen breaking of ancient taboos. Tiberius later chronicled leader, sensed the shift. "We are engines of war." Geology hardened into purpose past man's weaknesses. But then Jurgen spoke. Hughes-filtered light catching eager grok steaks cooling on his plate. The sands, home, crystals like broken glass, staining the canyon's crimson at dusk. His hand tightened around a flagon. Throck of the Templars muttered of endless prayer cycles before hive breaches, words sharp with faith hard as blades. Morn of the Iron Knights, famously taciturn, dropped a hammer fist onto the oak table at some memory of an ancient hivespire siege amid the clatter. "Early days," he ground out, "didn't know how cities scream inside." Laughter, edged with fatigue and loss, followed. Dark ale flowed a little warmer. The superhuman discipline that bound chapter to creed somehow, impossibly, began to dissolve around shared whispers of remembered worlds and shared horror on Anor. A fragile embryonic fracture in millennia of separation, forged in the shared crucible of abyssal despair before the war cries began. Brotherhood bloomed prematurely in the unlikeliest ground. For the fearful lords watching from distant sensors on Terra, a sop to relieve unease about commander control, Van D of the Inquisition arrived. Ordo Xenos newly minted. A compromise signed in half-truths. Death Watch would be of the Holy Ordos. Yet an Astartes master, independent chair, contested. Cabrazil Montwick, chosen from the somber gathering. Politics appeased ever so finely through sacrifice balanced on a knife's edge. First mission orders cracked across tactical displays. Oblivion beckoned. Teleport onto the awakened moon. Plant Mechanicum beacons threading arcane energies, locking onto its primary structure chorosynchronous displacement opposite gravity well. Illuminate Flotilla buys precious seconds, engaging fresh green tide, enveloping Luna defense platforms, statistically unlikely survival anticipated Yoda lethal efficiency essence, projected imperative artifact secrecy, volatile demon integral. Brother Arthon of the Auroras led them. The night before, not in mere prayer or weapon consecration, he confronted quiet vulnerability over tactical displays microplanet dimensions. Energy weapon wattage issues potential bottleneck caltrop fields, exit vector contamination possibility, says Metalican tech priest incense, heavy corridors. Barely entered penning parchment letters words shown, when not charcoal but memory persistent shell casings, ejecting onto plasmids, transferring torch passage bureaucratic notarization, unknown recipients embossed black noticeable. He survived the teleport ash storm ghostly flickering amongst conduits vast humming breathing deaths, delivering equipment, relaying location Delta Pylon, before failure plasma execution, swift silence plasma, shower vaporizing specimens, gnarly skin, bludgeoning numbers limited. Beacons planted weapon-activated planners, carefully orchestrated impossible, endeavor-fulfilled burning heights. Suffered delays, fragmented realities, tore massive orbital body component, violently messily ripped faster momentum impossible anchor, instability structural integrity, violently failed resultant shockwaves, shattered planetoid worldwide cities, vanishing debris hypervelocity, impacts atmospheric firestorms, spawned horrendous scale billowing vapors, mushrooming extending damage imperial. Palace towers breached leaning precariously underground shelters, collapsed evacuation routes blocked countless dying cries, unheard chained reactors, failing millions consumed torrential stone rain boiling, acid transforming into procession vectors, wasted legions choking fumes, witnessed orbital silent screaming confirmation efficiency, achieved nevertheless deadly exchange planetary stability, permanent scar, rendered victory shifting tragedy cold realities appreciation potential new tools. Unprecedented scope sinister application commendation, issued finish. Extent acceptable imperial commanders, evaluating divergent perspectives. Post-collapse humanity resilient, gradually rebuilding adjacent sectors. Simultaneously non-negotiated salvage operations. Ongoing Corax's stratagem balcony. Overlooking smoldering heaven's twisting gargoyles, relentless progress, shaped reshaping imperial military doctrine. Forever necessity, yet permanently cursed burden defaults inevitably. Anticipating unforeseen consequences, Grimm incurred continued conflict prolongs, mankind timeless determination, withstand defeat volatility challenges, future limitations patience eroding narratives unfolding. The embers in my small heater had long since died to dim coals, barely more than ghostlight now, just enough red stain on the air to stain the parchment and see the scratch of my stylus as the rain drummed a gentle, unending rhythm against the roof of my hab unit. It provided counterpoint to the torrential downpour outside, a fragile bubble insulating me only imperfectly from the weight pressing down on this fragment of the shattered Imperium. Some chronicles bleed harder onto the page. The Second Battle of Ullanor was one such. Not solely for the monstrous butcher's bill extracted, the regiments and formations chewed into obscurity, nor even the grisly necessity of sacrifice demanded for a mere chance at entry. It was the cruel snuffing out of that flicker of desperate hope, a flame briefly kindled in the darkest chasm after the disastrous assault on Attack Moon. In the wake of that failure, whispers clung to Corvus Corax like shadows. Those who stood closest during those grim months spoke of alterations deeper than fatigue or frustration, a new quietude settling into his movements and pronouncements. A Titan forced to pause and stare into an abyss that seemed to yield no answer known to mere martial dominance. The official archives would catalog his subsequent journey to Niller, as a strategic necessity, a relocation for potential assets. But Sergeant Morin, who walked those echoing habdeck corridors as the honor guard, set down a different scene. I found him, Morin's account began, etched on flimsy on the main observation blister. Starlight was the only illumination, cold and distant. He wasn't studying tactical overlays but gazing at real stars, his finger silently tracing a constellation path leading towards an uncharted system, its name lost on my tongue. He knew I was there without turning. Before I could offer a salute, he asked, his voice a low vibration in the dark vastness, "Have you ever felt truly alone, Sergeant?" Then, without allowing an answer that surely would have been inadequate, "There are those who understand that depth far better than either of us. These others, flung far beyond the edge of remembered loyalty, were the Sisters of Silence. Abandoned, despised by the Imperium they had shielded with their very existence since its genesis, since the Emperor himself walked beneath Terra's fading suns. For 15 centuries, they had endured on distant, forgotten Niller, upholding their ancient vigil, preserving traditions steeped in purpose and power, scorched by the betrayal of those too terrified to perceive gratitude, only the peril of gifts they could not control. The silent shroud, the psychic nullfield radiating from their unnerving presence. Yet, when Corax's expeditionary fleet dropped from the warp, it wasn't silence they found dominating the world they sought, but the roar and crude fusillade of an Ork siege. Not scattered raiders, but an unnervingly coherent and purpose-driven attack force, armed with viciousness honed specifically to breach the Sisters' last sanctuary. Even the frothing crescendo of the Orkish psyche recognized the existential terror of true silence, the nullifier of the WAAGH. Energy itself, the silencing of their intoxicating roar. Once the siege was shattered by Imperial might reinforcing the Sisters' desperate last stand, Corax stood before a conclave of suspicion hardened by 15 centuries of lawful exile, performing perhaps the most delicate operation of his life. Persuading souls with every conceivable reason to curse the aquila etched on his pauldron and slam shut their ancient doors. Threats would be laughable to such beings, mere declarations of imperial authority impotent dust against their justified bitterness. What lifted the rusted bars of their collective heart wasn't duty, nor the specter of annihilation threatening worlds beyond theirs. It was 2 words, Vulcan's blessing. The name of the Promethean, the unbound flame, one who embodied empathy they had known precious little of. That name was a key forged on the anvil of shared loyalty far deeper than the shifting sands of politics or pragmatic need. In that breath, between refusal and acceptance, 15 centuries of imposed solitude fractured and fell away. The Sisters of Silence rejoined the fight, stepping back into the chaotic maelstrom of mankind's long war not as subjects reclaimed, but as companions walking alongside the newly forged Deathwatch. Thus armed with a weapon unique and terrible against the Orkish psychic juggernaut, Corax rebuilt his strategy. Under the deadly mantle of Deathwatch vengeance, missions scoured contested worlds, snaring orc pyromancers, seers, and weirds twisted conduits of the beast's gestalt power. The insights gleaned coalesced into a brutal gambit, using the sisters' inherent nullification as a psychic dam, forcing the orcs' own tumultuous mental energy to surge inward against its creators until it ruptured. Trials on worlds like Incus Maxima delivered results stark, bloody, but promising grot-infested strongholds fell to imploding leaders, war-fed detonations unleashed by trigger contact with the void. Enough justification whispered on the wind-decided Korax, Ullinor must bleed again. The second invasion fleet assembled. Smaller, leaner, honed to a razor edge when compared to its monumental predecessor. It lacked the sheer continent-dropping bulk of countless regiments, but its heart pulsed with hardened experience and grim acceptance. Space Marines representing chapters who understood the darkness they faced strike teams from the Obsidian Black-Armored Death Watch, veterans of the Imperial Guard whose gazes saw horrors beyond battlefield glory, and flanking them, the silent presence of those who walked the null. This wasn't a force intoxicated by the hero's ballad. This was the instrument of the survivor, calibrated for the absolute necessity. The brutal symphony began with annihilation. Void-crippled Imperial warships, names forgotten amidst the colossal expenditure of souls, answered their last duty. Engines screamed towards physical impossibility, void shields flaring incandescent death as kinetic yields buried in hulls met the impossible barrier of the orc energy shield generated from the planet below like a malevolent atmosphere. Thousands died instantly, cleansing fires consuming them, souls scattered into the warp's teeth, a brief sacrifice required only for the faintest tear to appear in the beast's protective dome. One sliver of vulnerability. Into that nightmare instant leapt Korax, and his assassination's spearhead teleport beams lancing down through churning plasma fires, depositing conditioned killers onto the gore-slicked plating deep within the beast's own seat of power, the Black Man of the East Orc. The ambush site chosen was as immense as it was unnerving. A throne room of titanic proportions, a cavern fit for raw nightmare deifying itself. 6 colossal thrones, towering stone and crude metal, arranged with disturbing geometric alignment. Around them loomed 6 monstrous statues, crude gods rendered in terrifying likeness. 6 ragged banners smelled of ancient blood. 6 thrones. The implication stopped the breath in one's chest, cold dread replacing battle focus regarding orcs ever coordinating on this level. Worse was the absence of life from guarding hordes, utterly silent relative to the carnage outside. The beast knew. It had allowed them ingress, lured the hammer inside. Then, like rancid trap jaws snapping shut, the breached planetary energy shield slammed back into existence, a cracking dome sealing them inside their chosen tomb. Simultaneously, Auspex screamed betrayal as an entire orc ambush fleet phased from Void Shadow orbital clarity vanishing amidst brutal broadsides. Korax didn't hesitate. Shaking off the tactical catastrophe unfolding above, he pressed his squad ever inward. Desperate corridors echoed to the brutal cadence of bolter discipline, whine of servomotors, percussive bark of arm-mounted cannons, hacking power swords taking limbs against ambush hordes reluctantly assembled from inferior stock who thought 6 attacks per minute glorious. Gradually, agonizing yard by slippery yard, the survivors fought through the fortress of primal bad dreams into the tortured heart. A cavern dwarfing even the throne hall, sparse illumination, barely caressing impossible scale. At the center, perched upon one of the 6 thrones withdrawn into shadows, sat a mountain of scarred meat and mad science in hulking mega armor, honor guards comparable in size only to Terminators bellowing challenges. Here was stage 1, the signal. Sisters of Silence, feeling their imminent destruction gathering in the approaching footsteps shaking the floor, enacted the predefined ritual sequence. Not intricate warding or ancient words, but the focused total suppression of their silencing field concentrated, given form through sacrifice to their oneness. Normally a psychic disruption static, it drilled deep into the nervously present, shivering pyromancer, held like a living circuit breaker, and exploded its limitations. Visualized as a black star pinpointing the first throne, the immense warboss seated therein didn't just choke. Its body spasmed, its immense psychic presence condensing physically around it until the pressure exceeded even fused orc biology. It collapsed imploded like a punctured gas giant pressure valve. The resultant psychic backblast was incandescent, a silent panic tearing through the WAAGH's foundations, freezing Orks stone-like mid-charge, paralyzing their warriors in the field, sending fleeing Ork ships colliding blindly one into another across the orbital tumult. That split-second universe-fractured shock was Corax's moment of bloody possibility. He charged with his remaining warriors' Death Watch lethality, enhanced by Black Templar's Marshal Bohun's Firestorm Power Fist, striking again and again. Against the stunned immensity, against impossible scale clad in thick plating forged beyond human understanding, they struck bolter rounds punching inches deep harmlessly nearly everywhere. Plasma burns scarring impossible musculature, but they scored, chipping relentlessly toward the core weakness the shock helped expose. Focused Storm Man, hammering away impact after impact into refined chance. Miraculously, intolerably costly in both irreplaceable Genosoldiers and Silent Sisters who caught stray, obliterating impacts before vanishing entirely, the unimaginable happened. The one they mistook became the beast, Thraka approached death. This huge mockery of life was overwhelmed and torn asunder under the focused violence unleashed when salvation seemed beyond comprehension. But victory, snatched from annihilation's maw under sheer stubborn ferocity, dissolved faster than it formed. Before they could breathe, reorganize, before Corax himself could command the genocide extraction that necessity demanded, the very stones around them groaned under a heavier tread. Then deeper shadows moved unnaturally gigantesque, a form colossal beyond the destroyed one. Given birth from the throne's shadow behind the victors emerged stunningly, the original beast touched, watched, and amused. A living god arrived on arms and legs, twisted mythologically here, to judge the ants crusading to set off dust bombs. Possessing mass and near impossibility even for their capacities, something beyond tactical preparation, the true beast, the entity that once fractured the skull of Vulcan itself. Shout warnings were choked certainty felt before they formed. Purpose overwhelmed thought. Apocalyptic speed flashed its terrible hand into the space Corax, occupied one cataclysmic impact, so gigantic it ignored parrying, mitigation, escaped the crunch of ceramite resisting for a microsecond, and pulverizing under mass measured in continents, making the Primarch stagger forward. Chainsword falling without defense, as the other closure happened, the true heel slammed Corax up off his feet, and down underfoot, the resonant boom felt as much as heard within the command cadre, making all combat pause in WAAAGH's horror, explained instantly. Humans died surrounding that platform immediately. The beast desired consumption prevention over such small bodies. The corpse of Corax revealed itself during cessation of motion, utterly pulped ceramite, shredded revealing armor relic engrams, blinking failure signals. His broken carcass remained intact, miraculous enough even possessed, as his killers intended that mission commanded retention. Survivors reacted instantly, instinct seizing the ruined body, dragging it backwards, towards teleporter access corridors slowly reactivating, as the chamber warped defensively again to accommodate its owner and fled carrying shattered symbols wrapped in anguish and terrifying secret. 6 thrones were empty of champions now, only 2 fronts had emerged visibly, waiting occupants girding themselves elsewhere. The worst revelation imaginable bearing down uncontrolled collapse. As Corax required passage to Terrata, upon Golden Cenotaph vessel tribute, sent off with quiet revolutions, preventing any public visibility representing Vulcan's disappearance, had broken the spine of Imperial command adequately. Yet the planet, Basilicum Ultima, held bleak ceremony in frozen, in with the isolated fortress tomb-like, homeworld forsaken any decorations signifying Corvus Corax homecoming. Snow traded the rain, now misting down outside my hab unit lamp, like crystalline tears, reflecting cold blue-white artificial shine, recalling those collected together there. Relentlessly windswept ambience, pierced only by astronomically precise ceremony performed by surviving suns. Maximus Thane sensed proximity, surrounding structures radiating calming influence amidst appalling loss rendition tragedy, transforming practical arrangements. The brothers' ancient first founding chapter assembled, without banners fanfare restoring meaning beyond grief-paralyzed empire. Simultaneously immersed amidst white swirl softly on yellow shoulders, commanding exempel chapter master Thane witnessed green flames, foul liquid consistency, lighting pyre-devouring remains of solar day sinking in sorrow-painted heavens, above seeing not only goodbye-touched apocalypse-roaring armored icons, twisting darkness inexplicably. Precisely that wake atmosphere offering bitter clarity for analyzed current disaster. Terra squandered lifeblood, whilst High Lard squabbled claiming influence, provided death-decreased gods, sustaining foundations below he recognized necessity in shadows. Unlike Corax, whose loyalty traversed structure reluctantly, or Vulcan leading fiery hammers, straight over barricades Thane calculated necessities with restraint and dangerous secrecy. Bringing allies required patience timing. Potentates like Draken Vangorich potentially exposing corrupt Senate actions. Materium Fabricator General Kubix, intimately understanding fabric, required sowing shattering landscape. Thread begun between thrones, reviving remnant influential bodies, motivated practical forwarding goal is necessity. But first, glaring absence demanded urgent repair. Death Corax shattered history, his paramount segment Legion Emperor created, disappeared entirely leaving crater innate history-perpetuating order. A foundational chapter vanished within wider collapse frayed beginning. Consciously directly Thane calling every successor, whose foundations connected ribs across galactic void, invoking sacred brotherhood chains, beyond conventional reason demanded reparations. Astartes embark replenishment beyond affirmation, lineages nurtured carefully answering call. Each contributing warriors willingly freeing brothers their prime strengthening ordnance for sacrifice Terra. Until this moment, summoned expelling elsewhere uncharted requirements, imposed few cycles later upon Imperial Palace, approached Terra mainland press-strike shelters, echoed new ranks hardening resolve. Thousand Legion descendants stood battle-hard discipline, immaculate ranks, supposed gold armor inherited house symbol, polished brilliantly stirring visualization, mirroring armored field, reflecting sunrise providing tongues, name Legion Dreadnought, emotionally reproclaiming Imperial pushback, fire heroic symbol. Atop ash pit suffocating populace morale signifying Phoenix arise. Standing fixed helm removed beneath tower's throne Thane accepted symbolic praetor weapon, honoring its history. Reacting unexpected changes, thrust chapter master robes, symbol designating authority, defunct role, entirely merged fists, remarkably rebirthed collective spirit, gallantly raised above gloom, surrounding all visible horizon despair. This formation heralded commencement, opposite darkness institutional presences, reinforced army, gathered navigating orbit-forming step phase plan assault Anner, designed Thane, reflecting past vulnerability rejecting frontal force, oppose impossible density opponents. Lesson painfully seized Corax confrontations, revealed orbital supremacy merely stage glow, against planet-powered checks unleashed annihilation. Consequently deploying ancient Mechanicus heretical weaponry, faithful agents, engineered gravitational pathways, diverting colossal in-system asteroids into pinpoint trajectories, calibrated violation orbital defenses, ignoring shields mass trades, batting aside skyscraper-sized rocks, negligible party decoration sites. Cyclopean balls of fused geological hell impacting oceans, land masses delivered upon sacred orc breeding hell world seismic ablation, rearranging continent structures, obliterating countless greenskin lifting machinery, to sky obliterated zones beyond salvage or counters, had chaos followers founding successfully in similar strokes elsewhere, proven vulnerable fragile arcologies, tirelessly rebuilding resistance, eventually holding ground utterly unprepared predecessor assault waves organically. Immigrating second onslaught buildup. Tactical brilliance completely negated major initial difficulties confronting siege, required directly purposeful maneuvering, deep, nourished, successfully locating central target citadel, swallowed entirety home secrets. 5 dedicated assault groupings, teleported inside precisely calculated impact crater platform, designated asteroid 44th USA, finding profoundly irregular fortress, retaining formidable integrity internal kilometers, confuse invaders retreated forming comfortable massacre fields, allowing Orkide naturally chaotic tendencies, swamp any infiltration attempts, approach inward tunnels. Strategy depended upon drawing expendable forces activated planned. 4 assault groups anchoring entire perimeter each incurring horrific casualty, Rates solely occupation principal labor forcing security forces outward. Before holding trapped between hammer mobile wreckage locksmith troops, delve deep identifying entrance, thereby central axis guarding, throne complex beacon psychic signature, unparalleled contours. Accompanying TH himself core strike group included Sisters Silence, imposing null bustlings, alongside Adeptus Astartes plus Astartes, acquired Orc Pyromancer Tremble, converted living weapon dialed device, transforming WAAGH. Reversal critical breakthrough. Provisional screened chaos poured through arteries leading crumbling palace walls, applying Orc Psyker like Psychic Ram, overcome anti-storm mass blue energy. Brutally suffering legitimacy consumption, providing pathway cosseted guardians, survive battering towards target location. A second Pyromancer expended critical corridor, sealed seer energies, unraveling structural integrity, collapsing tunnel ambush, delaying retreat severely. Traversing innumerable chambers, dripping ichor, finally signal emanated throne hall destination. Chillingly identical dimensions, encountered Korax, engraved disaster, narrative waiting, untroubled exact symbol placements, sculptural terrors, ape Usurus shapes inflicted upon ruined primary attacker, mentally trap endured. Domination sat centralized axis manifested entity eyes, contained dying star systems, endlessly hungering dominating lesser consciousness segment, seemingly snuffing life, aesthetically imposing unique qualities. Survivors relaying incidents afterward described transfixion. Look, this beast conveyed impression not beheld creature, but rather essence pure evil detached, immersed spiritual void stretching beyond defined existence, deflating surrounding utterly. Brother Caiaphas observed chilling proximity reporting companion, sharing true depths later confided alone nightly afterbone terrors, placed his condition. Lock-gaze superintelligence, seeming flowing warp infinite itself, staring back predatory cold intellect, thinking paradoxically duality symbols, meant elbow congruently infinitely patient-seeking, offering livestock. Soon consumed limitlessly exploiting thrive life onwards expand domination, await behavior openings witness true motivations. This confrontation marked horrific composure, unmade resistance, focused Thane tactics, demanded perfect coordination moment. Remaining Sister Silence Cavalera, commanding infinitely diminished commanders, activated remaining captured Psyker integrated sacrifice, enacted counter mosaic reality, suppressing generational disintegration, spreading radially outwards, simultaneously, severing weak Gordian continuity yourselves, slowly host controller forces planet-wide, effects variation. That fractional moment succeeded. Beast momentarily disconnected Gestalt, finally concentrated striking prescient. Thane variables exploited precisely driving-powered founders, power sword ignite penetrate weakened armor, J-digit creating rupture operation, permanently destroy capacity, functioning observing extinction physical existence manifestation, momentarily. Beast head detonations witnessed through violent seizures, expressing rapidly terminating psychic deaths, shrieking backlash, disorienting turbulence rippling waves, planet deepest chamber vaults orbital vessels viewing absent controllers focused resolve, crumpled without that singular intelligence, eternally governing strategic coherence slaughter, achieving utter victory sensed instantly troop, thought previously impossible relieving tension organs, amid further struggle subsided frames, wider implication dawned. Suddenly realized profoundly changed universe capable conquering institutions, finally outline architecture, permanent deep, throated managed cessation perturbations, across Anner possibility signaled platform capitulated, really defeated genuinely dead, comprehensive completeness, reformed constellation thieves, scalpels, claimed decapitated head deeply merged understanding signature uttered creator fear arbitration, delivered accordingly conclusion inevitable, apparently complete however delayed. Absolution costly already inflicted. Though uncountable orcs stagger aimlessly within galaxy, they fracture cohesion rendered localized threats manageable highest threat, removed definitively binding psychic keystone, ripped violently still signaling dangerous unity permanent risk galaxy owned crystallization, achieve scaled appropriate. Constructed normally far easier erosion factions, consuming weakness unseen infection stations inevitably. Recovery fleet journey return tear reflection, accompanied unsettling silence, forming perpetrator commerce medicinal decks. Found cramped ranks, lay wounded projectile burned viscera. Fragments mined inscriptions, sacred technicians, slowly mend autocannon limbs, engraved tech priests, knelt amidst impaired machinery, chanting binary litany drone soothing afflicted machine spirits, sorrow projected engagements, counted individually securing immaculate records, every name rendered for memorial huge. Marble surfaces, honor grid, structured obvious reminder price, exacted negligible remission, remotely worthy effort achievements measured. Planetary survey, Anner returned unholy conclusion. Life exterminated world, effectively contaminated virus munitions, applied liberally ensure hazardous pockets reclaimer rejection, considered unsuitable greenskin recolonization, innumerable centuries monument desecration, toxic idle chat memoirs, believe necessary requirement, remain hollow, outcome compensate countless lives, claimed enduring the beast outlasting horrors conceivably balanced affirmation, survivors exist beyond image resolution, imagining grimlied experiences, justified remains. Extract fortune. Additional pronouncements arose quietly simultaneously Terra, reactivated stage prepared. Allowed Thane dictated twin decrees, reverberating imperial governance traditions, foundationally. Firstly resurgent imperial fists, possess guarding Terra, standard burden relocate, instead perpetual crusade uplifting planets, afflicted better rogue encounters, fostering better defense systems, preparing eventual possible crises, far horizons preparatory battlefield doctrine, resuming original mission structure. Second critical statement, influenced indefinitely announced Draken Vangorich Lord Protector, sanctified managerial veteran defense minister, consume unlimited authority unify, rebuilding effort reinforced bulwark political chaos prevention, deep whispered knowing Vangorich coronation, proclaimed daily tactical labyrinths, chart correctly available exploration priorities archives, administrative, maze fortunately brief century, past securing protection, title lord supporting stead opposed. Unhallowed civil fractious expansion, carved stability, rebuilding Areopolis bastions, strengthened significantly posed consumers, refocused replenishing shattered legions, new recruits poured bolster lines, sanction forth, founding shoving finer forge investment, pharmaceutical world colonization. Frontiers organize preempt future conflicts, standing vital ironically strengthening gradually forgotten error, allowed beast, rise foundation, undetected crime suppression, maintained newly regrouping orc infestations. Partially managed periphery, creating fragile resemblance, normalcy imperceptible mankind takes ordinary markets, reopen temples bloom, rebuild children laughter return streets, paved white marble tombstone city rubble. Previously filled red flowing battlefield remnants emerge between structures monuments rebraced fit life, enduring nevertheless resilient forcing intact social modality. Improve functional earliest disrupted weekly sessions, scheduling decrees publicly savor changed significantly. Observed historians diligent Vangorich, increasingly taciturn shortening distances, physically meetings familiar broke atmosphere tension, growing visibly impassable gulf understandings, happy engagement fading letters, preserved shiny slate permit readers anticipate later downfall, presented quite clearly crescendo awaits, cracked resolve witnessed individual notations, hinting Dwemer intensification, bleeding paranoia legitimacy, written commendation, opposing factions, acquisitive ambitious poisoned. Timelines contained list, arrests deemed necessary later investigations, demonstrate dishonesty borderlines implication, suicidal betrays under fabricator General Cubiz, identified collusion orc factions, hesitating resistance folding terror, be the cold calculus still hung in the air of the hall of weapons. Thick as the incense burned to mask the scent of void-chilled metal. Kubik's voice, unrepentant even now, echoed silently in the vaulted chamber sacrificing lives and worlds for scraps of orc tech aboard the stolen Ark Majesty. All justified in the name of power, stolen knowledge hardening the Imperium like corrupted ceramic. For Vangorich, hearing that same frigid logic echo where billions had screamed amidst the burning hulks of the Beast War, it crystallized the rot at the Imperium's heart. This wasn't folly, it was confirmation. The High Lords were cancers, self-serving and insatiable, unmoved by the abyss they'd stared into. Learners of nothing, forgetters of everything. So Vangorich acted, purged the sickness in a single, brutal dusk under the designation, the beheading, in 546 M32. Only Inquisitor Veritas remained, a lone survivor amidst 12 cooling corpses whose eyes seemed to follow him from the statues he later commissioned, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps grim satisfaction, perhaps lingering affection, or merely a spider's instinct to keep a useful thread intact. Through proxies whispering his will in the Senatorum, he held the reins for 8 decades. Reconstruction crawled forward, defenses hardened, an illusion of brittle stability held. But within the Lord Protector, the well of doubt deepened into paranoia, warping him as he warped the throne world. Years pressed down, twisting the mind that navigated the labyrinth of rule. When word finally reached the crusading imperial fists Maximus Thane, leading the grim procession home of Vangorich's unraveling mind, their return to Terra felt like the inevitable, crushing wheel of fate rolling back. The confrontation was stark, bereft of ceremony. Vangorich, waiting in the shadow of his own cold memorials, statues of those he executed standing like silent accusers. He offered Thane no defense, no argument, just a terrible, weary acceptance, a soul relieved to shed its crushing burden. 3 boltrons fired with the same remorseless precision that judged the High Lords decades prior shattered his skull and heart. Vangorich's long, corrosive vigil was done. Rain lashed the small, thick viewport beyond my cramped desk, pouring liquid shadows down the plasteel. This relentless deluge had persisted for weeks, saturating the flakboard walls of my habunit with dampness. But now, finally, a lull. The downpour's drumming faded to a drip, revealing the bruised canvas of the sky beyond my sliver of transparency. Swept clean by the storm, stars blazed with uncanny brightness. My gaze, as if pulled by an unseen tether, locked onto the constellation they whisper of locally, as the hunters spear 3 piercing points of white fire in perfect, unwavering alignment, aimed unerringly towards a 4th, solitary star that burned with a persistent, unsettling tint. A subtle, insidious green phosphorescence, more felt than truly seen in the absolute blackness. How many nights have I crouched here, hunched over salvaged reports, eyes drifting ceaselessly back to that baleful beacon? Countless nights bleeding into decades, my silent vigil mirroring the Imperium's slumber. Each time I looked, or imagined I looked, did that verdant pinprick gain a fraction more intensity? Was it merely the waxing fears of an aging mind, conjuring omens from stellar dust, or was it truly brighter? A knell tolling across the void, signposting an approaching horror. The evidence, dragged like iron filings from a mountain of encrypted astropathic intercepts, points to the latter with damning finality, not coincidences scattered like chaff, but a deliberate, escalating wave. You see, I glimpsed the raw truth once, a terrifying privilege afforded during my fleeting, nightmarish service as adjunct to Inquisitor Kistron of the Ordo Xenos. The sanitized files they spoon-feed sector governors and guard commanders, worthless parchment shielding them from reality. It was the raw intelligence pooled by the Inquisition's unseen swarm of watchers that chilled my blood then and freezes it now. The surge in Ork sightings, raids, infestations across all 5 segmentum it refuses tactical rationale. It doesn't sprawl randomly like uncontrolled fungal bloom. When mapped, its malignant spread displays a chilling, dreadful logic discernible only through the alien lens of the Ork intellect itself. They are gathering, massing not for isolated scraps, but for something more. I remember Jervis Hulick, Navigator 3rd Class, noble blood thinned by 7 decades spent guiding ships through hell realms. In his final years, sight fading in his impossible third eye, he'd sit brittle as autumn leaves beneath the failing biolooms of his estate gardens on Terra. He spoke of shifts, terrible disturbances clouding the immaterium. Something stirs them, Theoden, he'd rasp, knotted hand trembling around his amasic tumbler. A tremor deeper than mere chaos. From beyond. Something crude, when it brushes the Jeller fields, it tests a vibration. His voice would drop to a haunted whisper, and it laughs. By the throne, Theoden, I felt its mirth. Hulick died when Cadia died, consumed with his ancestral plot. But his grim whispers coalesce with others' psyker reports, navigator logs from Vide stations across dying sectors. A psychic pressure builds within the warp, heavy with the stench and psychic resonance of the Orkish gestalt. They're weird boys, less conduits now, more raving vessels, shriek of visions gifted directly by Gork and Mork. Captured beasts in interrogation cages foam about a call of the gods, a summons pulling them towards a big purpose. Most monstrous are the glyphs, graffitied on shattered hive walls or carved into the hulls of scuttled hulks. where pictograms once screamed simple war, and crump, fanatical fervor twists them now. They depict green gods striding among their kin, chosen champions bathed in malign light, prophecies declaring a time when the stars turn green. The true scale of this horror demands a view from the void. Segmentum Solar, the heartland supposedly safeguarded, bleeds from wounds inflicted by raids tripling in frequency and deadliness within a century. Orc empires claw hold within clear assault range of hive worlds vital to our continued existence. Segmentum Obscurus drowns under the compounded nightmares of Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade and the gaping maw of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Here, the greenskins swarm into breaches rent open by chaos, planting warboss banners on planets stripped of defenders. Segmentum Tempestus witnesses the obscene, cancerous growth of the Octarian Empire, a monstrous experiment gone monstrously wrong. The Inquisition's gamble, pitching Tyrannid hive fleet Leviathan into the greenskin meat grinder, vomited forth a hideous symbiosis. Each clash hones both sides into deadlier instruments. The Orks evolve not towards extinction, but apex predation. Ultramar itself, a shining bastion in Ultima Segmentum, sees entire subsectors drowned beneath wave after wave of green bodies, conquest unfolding with terrifying precision staging grounds for a larger slaughter. Even the Pacificus, bred on millennia of deceptive peace, tastes sudden iron and smoke as Orc raids erupt, savage and unexpected, on worlds that barely remembered them as frontier legends outside of vidcast propaganda reels. Plotting these incursions on my scavenged star charts crumpling beneath weary fingers, the dread solidifies. This isn't random spore drift. It's coordinated like the malignant tendrils of a galactic stranglevine, purposeful tendrils reaching to seize worlds of horrific strategic value, establishing connective corridors, consolidating power rings around key systems dense with feral energy. This is empire building. Sweat beads cold against my forehead as I transcribe this admission, my writing hand shaking, forcing the looping script onto the flimsy. Through the weep-strict viewport, that star seems to pulse with a green deeper than emerald tonight, brighter, sharper. Or perhaps it is my fear, thick and clotted, distorting the light. Fear from a servant of a dying empire who has glimpsed the assembly of the storm beyond the horizon's curve. The Orcs aren't merely a threat, they are changing, remembering, an instinct buried in genetic memory uncoiling like steel springs rusted tight for eons. We don't face another cyclical spore surge. We witness the awakening. Not of savages, but of the thing the ancients engineered, the ultimate weapon the old ones loosed against gods, slumbering through the fall of kingdoms. Its metal softened by millennia of feral distraction now sharply remember its purpose. The Imperium believes our survival is our victory. We have endured. Horus brought down the heavens and failed. The beast rose and was struck low. Vander drowned worlds in faith and fire, but the golden throne still glows. We endure. Yet I fear this cancerous complacency is the spore that will ultimately rot us from within. This green tide rises with a chilling, coordinated intention, a martial rhythm in its drum beats unheard since the dark ages of creation. Behind that wave, standing colossal amidst the growing psychic static, I perceive the echoes, the game masters moving their recovered pawns. I see the shadows of the old ones, architects of genocide, observing their dormant weapon shaking off the dust and sharpening its blades once more. The downpour had returned, a monotonous drum roll against the thin metal skin of the habunit, a familiar presence masking the deeper, more frightening silences within. Tendrils of sacred incense from earlier devotions clung stubbornly to the stale air, merging uneasily with the sense of dry parchment dust, stale recaf, and mildly rancid lamp oil seeping from his disassembled laspistol splayed across the nearby workbench. Shoulders burning with the dull ache of hours crouched over the scarred wooden writing surface, Theoden Valchek sat back, his spine a constellation of sparks. The ceramic cup beside him mocked him with its chill emptiness. The untouched recaf within settled into a tar-like sludge he couldn't summon the will to reheat. Outside, true darkness ruled, transforming the viewport into a reflective shield bouncing the warm, yellow glow of the lumen globes back at him, warping his own exhausted reflection into a flickering ghost. With a reverence feeling almost sacrilegious against its overtly dreadful contents, Valchek gently closed the thick leather cover of his primary manuscript. His tremoring fingers traced the tooled designs, worn smooth and dark by decades of obsessive handling. A lifetime of whispers stolen from dying worlds, dangerous artifacts calibrated, fractured stories gathered at gunpoint from captured survivors, all preserved in ink and supposition. It felt terrifyingly insufficient, a sandcastle before the tidal wave. His gaze slid sideways to the treacherous star charts dominating the adjacent metal table. One planetoid, marked plainly in the third quadrant, bore a standardized imperial marking, a crude green skull. Official reports intercepted like scraps tossed from passing Navy vessels spoke of a minor infestation, cleansed 8 Terran months prior. Imperial efficiency meant armed probes, minimal tactical recovery, prioritizing obvious weapon assets, maybe biological decontamination, a superficial sweep, wiping the surface clean while blind to the vital rot seeping deeper below. WAAAGH nudged a slender vial with a fingertip, lifting it towards the flickering glow. Inside, inert gray dust, seemingly mundane. But this grub was sacred earth, scooped frantically from an overlooked orc burial pit on Vard's Prime, earth rich with spores that never truly awakened beneath the obscuring layers of time. He saw it, felt it, the faint glaze of latent green clinging to the microscopic particles. What they leave behind, WAAAGH breathed at the dust motes dancing within the vial, the words rasping in the thick silence. That's where the truth festers. That's the weakness, the vision we deliberately blind ourselves to. Rising, his joints protested with sharp cracks, WAAAGH shuffled to the sealed cabinet set deep into the ferrocrete wall flanking his cot. Its surface, slashed boot leather, spoke volumes of his life on the edge. Inside, carefully arranged, his aging envirosuit, the logical justification for his expedition, stinking faintly of ozone and recycled sweat, patched so many times the repairs formed a crude armor of carbonized synthetics. Beside it, specialized sample canisters, triply-sealed and inert-lined against the insidious whispering creep of orc biospores, cannibalized from explorator labs before they could be melted down. Data slates stacked in stands, their power cells glowing a comforting low amber, freshly charged for days of recording his heresies. Then, his pride and terror, the modified device he designated Wraithbite. No sleek Mechanicus logic here. A gutted Auspex core soldered to orc salvage, crudely rewired with copper cabling scavenged from a dead mechboy's workshop, its primary function to shriek at the lingering resonance of latent WAAGH, energy a ghost hunter tuned to psychic echoes. It might fail. It might attract chaos taint. It screamed tech heresy to any probing magos, but it was the only tool capable of sensing the despairing traces under the cleansed pile. A bassy chime shattered his inventory. 3 tones. Low. Insistent, the perimeter alarms. At the console, frozen beneath a screen showing wind-whipped dry scrub beneath heavy cloud cover, WAAAGH ran the replay. Movement sensors hadn't lied. Something larger than a rodent triggered them. Orks, or Arbites? One brought roaring death, the other inevitable torture and imprisonment ending with plasma. Both were equally terminal. Yet, the urge crawling beneath his sternum overrode the instinctive clutch of bowel-chilling fear. He needed to see. Returning to the writing desk, he deliberately avoided the main tome. He pulled out its shadow twin, a battered journal bound in synth leather scarred by scratches and spilled chemicals. Inside lay chaotic strokes, hurried sketches of bizarre glyphs seen through smoke, accounts of beast snagas enacting strange rituals under dying moons, transcripts of truthseers screaming about bigness echoing through the void. His personal Calvary. Flipping past pages of meticulous observation, WAAAGH found Virgin Leaf, the stylus suddenly gripped like a dagger against the paper. It's happening, not just growth, something deeper. The script became jagged, urgent, recognition, remembrance, the glyphs from Ulo Prime, the markings carved into the ossified bone temples on drought-stricken Tartarus, half a galaxy between them, the pattern of 3 etched beside the skewered Crawfus symbol. Not luck, not primitive reverence, shared intelligence. Shared warning, shared inevitability. He paused, pen trembling. It cannot be coincidence. The pattern demands coordination, deliberate intent. Static fizzed for a second from the darkened Vox unit perched on a shelf nearby, as if something vast had briefly disturbed the etheric flow, then went mostly quiet again, holding dread expectancy. WAAAGH stared at it, lips pressed thin. Sometimes, buried within that harmless atmospheric interference, hungry for sound. His ruined ears imagined rhythmic chanting layered beneath the signal noise. A prey creature's fantasy, he knew that. A hallucination born of fatigue and dread. Yet the scraping echo persisted, a psychic tinnitus scratching incessantly at the base of his skull long after the silence actively settled over it, thick as old tomb dust. The soft ping of his chrono marked the hour, a nudge toward rest before tomorrow's expedition. Yet logic, long vanquished by relentless obsession within Theoden Valak, held no sway. Instead, his hand moved toward a small, heavily secured metal box, bound by both a sturdy physical lock and shimmering hexagrammic wards humming faintly. From within, cushioned by protective cloth, he slid out a flat object, a tablet fashioned from some nameless, non-Terran material. Its surface crawled with glyphs far more intricate and sophisticated than any recorded Orc script within the annals of the Imperium. These pictographs revealed an impossible story, a narrative of Orc history stretching back into the unfathomable depths of time to the primordial war in heaven, rendered with an unexpected elegance that mocked Imperial understanding. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming hard against the roof of his isolated outpost like distant, shellarding artillery. Valak found a grim, familiar solace in this natural rhythm. It smothered the suffocating silence of his solitude. He knew with chilling certainty his life's work likely faced oblivion here, his forbidden insights condemned to die with him. Yet still he documented, still he analyzed, still he sought comprehension driven by a scholar's unwavering conviction. Understanding itself was victory. Knowledge, even the most heretical, was a weapon as vital and brutal as any bolter or power sword. Valak had pledged his very existence to arming humanity with this truth, whether they welcomed it or recoiled in terror. Carefully, reverently, he rewrapped the dangerous tablet and sealed it back within its glowing container. Tomorrow promised new discoveries, fresh clues to the ancient enigma of the greenskin race, perhaps even tangible proof supporting his most radical, his most damnable theory. That the Orc was not regressing from some mythical, noble ancestor, but actively evolving into something the galaxy had never witnessed. Such a concept should have filled his soul with dread. Instead, it ignited a cold, scholarly fire, a terrible, exhilarating excitement cutting through his weariness. As he finalized preparations for the dawn's dangerous probe, Valak's gaze drifted inevitably towards the small, dust-choked shrine in the corner, the imperial aquila barely visible beneath the neglect. Habit and a lingering echo of faith compelled him. "The Emperor protects," he whispered the ancient litany, the words catching in his throat, resonating as both a desperate entreaty and a hollow question. Then a rueful smile etched like another scar across his weary face. But knowledge serves. Outside, the wind rose, banding with the rain to hammer the walls, enveloping his sanctuary in the roar of the gathering storm. Within the drumming deluge, Theoden Valak persisted with his solitary, vital task, a single, flickering candle flame of hard, understanding burning with fierce intensity against the colossal, crushing darkness of human ignorance. His arduous duty to illuminate painful truths vital for mankind's desperate, fragile survival against the looming reality of the eternal green tide.